You've been wondering why nothing feels enough anymore. They told you that if you keep improving your life, the emptiness will disappear. That more success, more comfort, more attention would finally make you feel complete. But if that were true, why does satisfaction fade so quickly? Why does the mind return to wanting almost immediately? Why do you still feel restless even after getting what you once believed would fix everything? The truth is, nothing feels enough anymore because desire was never designed to be satisfied. It was designed to keep you searching. Buddhist reflections on desire reveal something most people never see, that craving quietly shapes your thoughts, your choices, and even your sense of self. The Buddha taught that the mind keeps reaching not because life is lacking, but because it has forgotten how to experience what is already here, like trying to fill a bottomless cup. Every achievement, every pleasure, every possession disappears into the same silent hunger. Tonight, as you listen, something will begin to make sense. You'll start to see the pattern behind the constant wanting, the invisible pressure to become someone else, somewhere else, sometime later. Your mind will slow down, the urgency will soften, and a strange calm will begin to replace the endless chase, as if you are stepping off a wheel that has been spinning your entire life. This isn't just a reflection on desire, this is an invitation to understand why the search never ends and how peace becomes possible the moment you stop believing that more will save you. Are you ready? Let's begin. Something inside you already knows this feeling. The quiet dissatisfaction that shows up even on good days. The sense that life keeps moving, achievements keep coming, experiences keep stacking up. Yet a strange emptiness lingers in the background, like a question no one can answer. It doesn't shout, it whispers, and the more you try to silence it by getting more, doing more, becoming more, the louder it quietly becomes. What you are about to understand is not a flaw in your character or a lack of gratitude. It is a pattern of the human mind that has been studied for thousands of years. A pattern so subtle that most people spend their entire lives trapped inside it without ever realizing it has a name. At the center of this pattern is a simple but unsettling truth. The hunger you try to satisfy is the very thing that keeps itself alive. Desire promises relief. It tells you that once you reach the next point, the tension will dissolve and you will finally be able to rest. It feels convincing because sometimes it works for a moment. You get what you wanted and there is a brief pause, a short window where everything feels aligned. But that window closes faster than expected. Soon the mind begins scanning again, searching for the next thing to fix, the next upgrade, the next reason to believe that fulfillment is just one step away. This is why more never feels like enough. Not because you are ungrateful, not because life is empty, but because desire does not operate like a need that disappears once it is met. It behaves more like a fire that grows stronger when you feed it. In Buddhist teaching, this is not described as a moral failure. It is described as a misunderstanding of how the mind works. The mind assumes satisfaction comes from acquisition, so it keeps acquiring. But acquisition only resets the baseline of what feels normal. What once felt extraordinary becomes ordinary, and ordinary becomes insufficient. Think about how quickly something new loses its power. A device you were excited about becomes just another object on your desk. A goal you once obsessed over becomes a memory you barely think about. Even relationships can shift from thrilling to routine, not because they lost value, but because the mind adapted to their presence. This adaptation is not a problem by itself. It is part of how humans survive and grow. The problem appears when adaptation is paired with the belief that the next thing will finally break the cycle. That belief keeps you running without ever questioning whether the race itself is the source of exhaustion. The hunger grows when fed, because feeding it trains the mind to depend on external stimulation for a sense of aliveness. Without new input, the mind feels dull. Without progress, it feels anxious. Without something to chase, it feels lost. so it creates new desires simply to avoid confronting that discomfort. Modern life accelerates this process. Endless options, constant updates, instant gratification. You don't even have to search for new things to want. They are placed in front of you every day. Advertisements show you what you are missing. Social media shows you who you could be. News cycles show you what you should worry about. The result is a mind that rarely experiences completion because it is always being redirected toward the next lack. But the deeper issue is not outside influence. It is the belief that fulfillment is waiting somewhere else. This belief creates a subtle form of self-abandonment. The present moment becomes a temporary space you tolerate while working toward a future that promises relief. Meals are eaten while thinking about the next task. Conversations happen while part of the mind is elsewhere. Achievements are acknowledged briefly before attention shifts to the next objective. Life becomes a series of checkpoints instead of something fully lived. Buddhist reflections point out that desire has a hidden side effect. It reduces your ability to experience what is already here. When attention is fixed on what is missing, appreciation for what is present fades. This is why people can have stability, safety, opportunities, even love, and still feel something is off. The mind has been trained to measure life by what has not yet happened. There is also a fear behind this constant reaching, a fear that if you stop wanting, you will lose motivation, lose direction, lose purpose. So the mind keeps generating new goals as a way to protect against that fear. Wanting becomes a substitute for meaning, but wanting and meaning are not the same. Wanting is restless, meaning is quiet. Wanting pushes forward. Meaning deepens where you are. Another layer of this hunger comes from identity. People often build a sense of self around what they pursue. If the pursuit stops, the identity feels threatened. So the chase continues not only for satisfaction, but for reassurance that you are still someone moving forward. Standing still begins to feel like disappearing. This is why rest can feel uncomfortable. Not because rest is wrong, but because it removes the distractions that normally keep the hunger occupied. In stillness, the mind notices its own unease. It notices the absence of stimulation, and instead of interpreting that as a chance to reconnect with the present, it interprets it as a problem that must be fixed by finding something new to want. The cycle becomes self-sustaining. Desire creates tension. Satisfaction briefly releases it. The release feels good, so the mind attributes the relief to the object rather than to the ending of craving. When tension returns, the mind looks for another object. The pattern repeats. What often goes unnoticed is that the peace you felt after getting what you wanted did not come from the object itself. It came from the temporary silence of desire. For a moment, the chasing stopped. And in that pause, the mind tasted what it feels like to not be pulled in any direction. That pause is available without acquiring anything, but it requires seeing the mechanism clearly. When you observe desire without immediately acting on it, something shifts. You notice how it rises as a physical sensation, how it comes with thoughts that justify its urgency, how it promises relief, and how it weakens if you simply stay present. This observation does not suppress desire, it exposes its nature. Over time, this awareness changes your relationship with wanting. You can still pursue goals, enjoy pleasures, build a life. But the desperation fades. The sense that everything depends on the next achievement dissolves. You begin to act from choice instead of compulsion. Life becomes lighter. You stop expecting permanent satisfaction from temporary things. You stop treating experiences as solutions to existential discomfort. You start recognizing moments of enoughness that were always available but overshadowed by constant anticipation. There is also a surprising side effect. When desire loses its grip, enjoyment actually increases. Food tastes better when you are not eating to fill an emotional void. Conversations feel richer when you are not mentally elsewhere. Nature feels calming when you are not using it as a backdrop for productivity goals. Presence amplifies experience more than accumulation ever could. This does not mean you stop caring about improvement. It means improvement is no longer driven by the belief that you are incomplete. It comes from curiosity, creativity, or compassion instead of from fear of not being enough. The hunger that grows when fed slowly transforms into a quieter energy, one that moves without urgency. You still participate in life, but you are no longer trying to outrun an invisible dissatisfaction. Buddhist teachings often compare this shift to putting down a heavy bag you did not realize you were carrying. Nothing external changes immediately. The world remains complex, uncertain, imperfect. But the internal pressure eases, and that changes how everything feels. You start noticing small details that used to be invisible. The sound of rain becomes soothing instead of background noise. A simple meal becomes satisfying instead of routine. Moments of silence stop feeling empty and start feeling spacious. This is not because life suddenly improved. It is because the mind stopped filtering experience through the question of what is missing. More never felt like enough because enough was never defined by quantity. It was defined by attention. When attention is scattered across future desires, the present shrinks. When attention returns to what is here, even ordinary moments regain depth. The deepest insight in this reflection is not that desire is bad, but that unconscious desire creates endless postponement. Conscious awareness restores immediacy. You begin to see that peace was never hidden behind the next milestone. It was buried under layers of anticipation. And once that becomes clear, something unexpected happens. The urge to chase softens on its own. Not because you forced discipline, not because you convinced yourself to be satisfied, but because you finally understood that the hunger you kept feeding was never asking for more things. It was asking to be seen, seen without judgment, seen without panic, seen without immediately trying to silence it. In that seeing, the cycle loosens. You are still human. You will still want, strive, dream, but the wants no longer define the quality of your existence. They become movements within life, not the engine of your worth. And in that space, something quiet and steady emerges, a sense that nothing was missing in the first place, only overlooked. The hunger that grows when fed loses its authority when you stop mistaking it for your guide. And what remains is not emptiness, but a calm presence that was always waiting beneath the noise. As that quiet presence begins to replace the endless hunger, another realization slowly comes into view, one that feels even more unsettling. The chase was not only something you were doing, it was something you started to believe you were. The desires were not just passing urges anymore. They shaped your choices, your habits, your conversations, even the way you introduced yourself to the world. Without noticing, the wanting turned into a mirror, and the person staring back was built from everything you were trying to obtain. There is a strange discomfort that appears when you stop chasing for a moment. It is not boredom. It is not laziness. It is a question that has been waiting underneath all the movement. If you are not pursuing something, who are you? Craving as identity begins quietly. At first, desire feels like a tool. You want something, so you move toward it, but over time, the movement becomes familiar. The mind learns to measure itself by what it is aiming at. Goals turn into definitions. Achievements turn into proof of existence. The future becomes a place where your value supposedly lives. This is how desire slips into your personality. You stop saying, "I want this," and start saying, "This is who I am." The career you chase becomes your name. The lifestyle you pursue becomes your story. The approval you seek becomes your emotional oxygen. Even suffering can become part of identity because it gives a sense of depth, a feeling of being someone who has endured something meaningful. Buddhist reflections describe this as a subtle form of attachment to self-image. The mind constructs a version of you that feels solid, consistent, recognizable. But that version is often built from desires rather than from direct experience. It is a collection of preferences, ambitions, fears, and comparisons held together by the belief that they define a permanent self. When craving becomes identity, letting go of desire feels like losing yourself, not because you actually disappear, but because the familiar structure you use to navigate life starts dissolving. Without the usual targets to chase, the mind searches for new ones simply to restore that sense of continuity. This is why people sometimes move from one obsession to another. When one pursuit ends, another quickly takes its place. The object changes, but the underlying need remains the same, the need to feel like someone who is going somewhere. Social environments reinforce this pattern. Conversations revolve around plans, achievements, upgrades, progress. When people meet, they ask what you do, what you are working on, what comes next. Rarely do they ask what it feels like to simply be alive right now, so the identity built on craving is constantly validated and strengthened. Over time, you may start feeling anxious when there is nothing impressive to report. Stillness feels like invisibility. Contentment feels like stagnation. You begin to fear being ordinary, not because ordinary is bad, but because it offers no dramatic narrative to hold on to. This fear keeps the cycle alive. There is also a deeper layer. Craving promises a future version of yourself that feels more complete than the current one. You are always becoming someone else, more successful, more attractive, more secure, more respected. The present self becomes a temporary draft, never the final version. Life becomes a project rather than an experience. But chasing a future self has a hidden cost. You end up living beside your own life instead of inside it. Moments are evaluated based on how useful they are for becoming that imagined person. If an activity does not contribute to progress, it feels like wasted time. Rest feels guilty. Joy feels suspicious unless it is earned. Buddhist teaching calls this the illusion of a fixed self moving through time. In reality, what you call you is a changing flow of thoughts, sensations, memories, and perceptions. There is no solid core that needs to be perfected before life can be enjoyed. But craving resists this fluidity. It wants something stable to improve, something permanent to secure. So it invents a story. The story says you are incomplete but fixable. It says happiness is conditional. It says once the right traits are acquired, peace will be justified. Until then, dissatisfaction is framed as motivation, rather than as a signal that something deeper is misunderstood. This story can be exhausting because it never allows you to arrive. Even when progress is undeniable, the mind adjusts the criteria. The finish line moves just like in the hunger described earlier, but now it moves in relation to your identity. You are never allowed to simply be enough as you are, because the identity depends on improvement to feel alive. Another way craving shapes personality is through comparison. You begin defining yourself in relation to others. Who is ahead? Who is behind? Who has what you want? Social comparison becomes a constant background process. Even without noticing, you measure your experiences against an imagined standard of how life should look. This comparison does not produce satisfaction, even when you come out ahead. It only creates temporary relief, followed by new pressure to maintain the position. Being better than someone else does not end insecurity, it shifts its focus. Relationships can also be affected. When identity is tied to desire, people around you become part of the narrative. They are valued for how they support your goals, reflect your status, or confirm your self-image. Connection becomes transactional without you realizing it. You seek affirmation rather than understanding. This can create loneliness even in the presence of others, because the identity built on craving is fragile. It constantly needs reinforcement. Any criticism feels threatening. Any indifference feels like erasure, so the mind stays alert, scanning for signs that the identity is still intact. What happens when the reinforcement stops? When achievements slow down? When roles change? When life circumstances shift? Many people experience a crisis not because life lost meaning, but because the identity built on craving no longer has fuel. Without the usual markers of progress, they feel disoriented. Buddhist reflections offer a different perspective. They suggest that the discomfort is not a loss of self, but an opportunity to see that the self you were protecting was never fixed to begin with. It was a pattern of habits, not a permanent entity. When you begin observing this process, the grip of identity loosens. You notice how thoughts about who you are arise and fade like any other mental event. You see how roles change depending on context. You recognize that the feeling of being a solid someone is constructed moment by moment. This recognition can feel unsettling at first. Without a rigid identity, there is a sense of openness that the mind is not used to. But within that openness, there is also freedom. If you are not defined by your cravings, you are not trapped by them. You can pursue goals without being consumed by them. You can change direction without feeling like you lost yourself. Life becomes less about proving who you are and more about experiencing what is happening. There is also compassion in this understanding. When you see how identity is shaped by desire, you begin to understand why others behave the way they do. Their struggles, ambitions, and conflicts are often attempts to protect the same fragile sense of self. Judgment softens, empathy grows. You realize that everyone is in some way chasing themselves, trying to become an image that promises relief from insecurity. Some chase status, some chase love, some chase control, some chase distraction. The forms differ, but the underlying movement is similar. Breaking this cycle does not require abandoning all ambitions or withdrawing from life. It requires shifting the foundation from which actions arise. Instead of acting to validate an identity, you act from clarity about what is truly meaningful in the moment. This clarity is quieter than motivation. It does not rush. It does not demand recognition. It simply guides behavior in a way that feels aligned rather than forced. Over time, a new sense of self emerges, one not built on constant becoming, but on awareness itself. You begin to identify less with the content of your thoughts and more with the space in which those thoughts appear. Desires still come and go, but they no longer define you. You are not the hunger. You are the awareness that notices the hunger. This shift changes how you move through the world. Success becomes enjoyable, but not necessary for self-worth. Failure becomes informative, but not devastating. Praise feels pleasant, but not addictive. Criticism feels uncomfortable but not annihilating. You stop chasing yourself because you stop believing there is a fixed version of you waiting to be achieved. Instead, life becomes a continuous unfolding, not a project to complete. And in that unfolding, something gentle but powerful appears, a sense of authenticity that does not need constant proof. You speak, act, and rest from a place that is not trying to impress or defend. There is less tension, less performance, less fear of being seen as ordinary. Ironically, this often makes you more relatable, more grounded, more present with others. Without the pressure to maintain an identity, you can actually listen, actually connect, actually participate, without calculating what it says about you. The energy that once fueled the chase becomes available for living. Craving as identity loses its hold, not because you destroy desire, but because you see that you are larger than any desire that passes through you. The personality built from wanting dissolves into a more fluid way of being, responsive instead of reactive, engaged instead of desperate. You no longer need to chase yourself because you are no longer hiding from the present moment. And as this understanding deepens, another illusion begins to weaken, the belief that somewhere ahead there is a final point where everything will settle and make sense. The mind has been relying on that idea for direction, for reassurance, for hope. But that belief, too, is part of the same pattern. Because the finish line you keep running toward was never fixed in the first place. As the need to chase a fixed version of yourself begins to loosen, another pattern becomes visible, one that has quietly directed your efforts for years. It is the belief that somewhere ahead there is a final point where everything will settle, where striving will no longer be necessary, where you will finally be allowed to relax without guilt. Yet every time you get close to that point, it shifts. The relief you expected turns into a brief pause, then a new pressure appears, as if the mind refuses to accept completion. There is a quiet exhaustion that comes from always living toward a finish line that never arrives. Not dramatic burnout, not obvious failure, but a subtle tiredness that sits beneath daily life. You accomplish things, you grow, you improve, yet a question lingers. Why does it still feel unfinished? The illusion of the finish line begins early. You are taught that life unfolds in stages, and each stage promises a reward. Finish school, and everything will open. Build a career, and stability will follow. Find the right partner, and loneliness will end. Secure enough resources and worry will disappear. These milestones are presented as checkpoints that lead to a final state of arrival. But arrival never happens in the way it was imagined. Each achievement changes your circumstances, but it also changes your expectations. What once felt like success becomes the new baseline. What once felt impossible becomes ordinary. The mind recalibrates so quickly that you barely notice the shift. Instead of feeling complete, you feel challenged again, as if life quietly raised the difficulty level without asking. This constant adjustment is not random. The mind is designed to anticipate and adapt. Anticipation creates motivation. Adaptation prevents stagnation. Together, they keep you moving. But when these mechanisms operate without awareness, they create the sense that fulfillment is always just beyond reach. You begin to live in a state of almost there. Almost successful enough, almost secure enough, almost respected enough, almost at peace. The word almost becomes the story of your life. Buddhist reflections describe this as a misunderstanding of time. The mind believes happiness exists in a future state, so it postpones contentment. When the future arrives, it becomes the present, and the mind shifts the target again. The process repeats endlessly, not because you are failing, but because the structure of desire depends on continuation. If the finish line were truly reached, the identity built on striving would collapse. Without something to pursue, the mind would have to confront the present without distraction. For many people, this feels unfamiliar, even threatening. So new goals appear, not always because they are meaningful, but because they restore the feeling of direction. This is why people who achieve major milestones sometimes feel unexpectedly empty afterward. The excitement leading up to the event disappears, leaving a quiet space that the mind does not know how to inhabit. Instead of interpreting that space as peace, it interprets it as lack of purpose. Soon another pursuit begins. Cultural narratives reinforce this illusion. Stories celebrate the climb more than the plateau. Success is portrayed as a dramatic transformation rather than as a change in circumstances that still requires inner stability to feel satisfying. The message is clear. Keep going, keep improving, keep pushing. Rest is framed as complacency. Over time, you internalize the idea that stopping is dangerous. Even brief satisfaction feels suspicious, as if you might fall behind if you allow yourself to be content. The mind learns to scan for the next gap to fill, the next area to optimize, the next version of yourself to construct. But the finish line keeps moving because it was never a fixed location. It was a mental projection shaped by your current dissatisfaction. When dissatisfaction changes form, the projection changes with it. Consider how many times you told yourself that once a certain problem was solved, life would feel lighter. When the problem was solved, other concerns appeared, not because life became worse, but because attention shifted. The mind cannot hold on to resolution for long. It gravitates toward unresolved areas. This process creates the illusion that peace is fragile, dependent on perfect conditions. In reality, peace is disrupted by the mind's habit of searching for the next improvement. Another layer of the illusion comes from comparison. Even if you feel satisfied with your progress, exposure to others' achievements can reignite the sense of incompletion. Seeing someone ahead of you resets your perception of where the finish line should be. The target moves outward, and what once felt enough feels insufficient again. This comparison-based shifting is particularly powerful because it disguises itself as ambition. You tell yourself you are just striving for excellence, just refusing to settle, but beneath that justification is often a fear of being left behind, overlooked or insignificant. The mind would rather keep moving than face that fear directly. There is also a deeper misunderstanding about what achievement can provide. External accomplishments change situations, not the structure of consciousness that interprets those situations. If the interpreting mind remains restless, no external condition can produce lasting satisfaction. This is why two people can reach similar milestones and experience them differently. One feels grateful and grounded, the other feels pressured to maintain the status or surpass it. The difference is not in the achievement, but in the relationship to it. Buddhist teachings emphasize that clinging to outcomes creates instability because outcomes are inherently uncertain and temporary. When identity and happiness depend on reaching specific states, anxiety becomes inevitable. The mind constantly checks whether the conditions are still secure. Letting go of the finish line does not mean abandoning growth. It means shifting from outcome-based living to process-based living. Instead of asking when everything will be enough, you begin asking how to be fully present within what is unfolding. This presence reveals something unexpected. The sense of incompletion was not coming from lack of progress, but from lack of attention to the moment itself. When attention returns, ordinary experiences regain depth. The need for dramatic milestones decreases because meaning is found in participation rather than in arrival. There is a quiet relief in realizing you do not have to solve life in order to live it. The pressure to finalize your identity, secure permanent happiness, or achieve a flawless trajectory begins to soften. You start allowing uncertainty instead of trying to eliminate it. Uncertainty becomes less frightening when it is not interpreted as failure. You also begin to notice how much of your life was spent preparing to live instead of living, waiting for the right conditions, the right confidence, the right clarity. But life was happening the entire time, not at the imagined finish line. When the illusion fades, effort becomes more intentional. You still set goals, but they are no longer tied to your worth. You still move forward, but without the desperation to arrive. Progress becomes an expression of curiosity rather than a defense against inadequacy. This shift reduces the emotional volatility that comes from attaching happiness to outcomes. Success feels good without inflating the ego. Setbacks feel disappointing without collapsing the sense of self. The emotional landscape stabilizes. You also become less susceptible to external pressure. When the finish line is internalized, others can manipulate it by defining what counts as success. When you see through the illusion, you regain autonomy over your direction. Another surprising change occurs in relationships. Without the constant focus on future achievements, you become more available to people as they are, not as part of your progress narrative. Conversations deepen, presence increases, shared moments feel meaningful without needing to serve a larger plan. This does not reduce ambition, it refines it. You pursue what resonates rather than what promises validation. The energy behind action shifts from tension to engagement. Over time, a different kind of fulfillment appears, one not dependent on reaching a final state. It feels quieter, less dramatic, but more stable. It does not spike and crash like excitement. It hums steadily in the background, allowing joy to arise from simple experiences. You realize that the finish line was a mental shortcut, a way to cope with uncertainty by imagining a point where uncertainty would end. But uncertainty is part of life's movement. Trying to eliminate it creates more tension than accepting it. Acceptance does not mean passivity. It means working with reality instead of against it. Goals are approached with dedication, but without the illusion that they will solve existential discomfort. As this understanding deepens, the urgency to rush through life diminishes. You stop treating the present as a stepping stone and start treating it as the only place life actually unfolds. Time feels different. Moments stretch instead of blur. Gratitude becomes easier because attention is no longer hijacked by anticipation. You may still plan, still dream, still aspire, but the dreams no longer hold your peace hostage. They become possibilities rather than conditions for happiness. The illusion of the finish line dissolves into a recognition that life is not a race toward completion, but an ongoing process of experiencing, learning, and relating. There is no final checkpoint where everything locks into place, and strangely, this realization does not create despair, it creates freedom. Because if there is no ultimate finish line, there is also no ultimate failure for not reaching it. There is only the path unfolding moment by moment, shaped by awareness rather than by compulsion. You begin to trust that meaning is not waiting at the end of effort, but woven into the act of living itself. And as this trust grows, another insight quietly emerges. Many of the desires that fueled the race were not even originally yours. They were inherited, absorbed, learned from the world around you. Which means the next step is not to chase harder, but to question whose goals you have been running toward all along. As the illusion of the finish line begins to lose its grip, another uncomfortable realization starts to surface. If the race never truly belonged to you, then whose voice was telling you where to run? Beneath many ambitions and longings, there is often a faint echo of expectations that were absorbed long before you had the awareness to question them. What felt like personal desire may have been quietly shaped by the environment, by culture, by the invisible pressure to fit into a story that was already written. There is a subtle unease that appears when you pause long enough to ask a dangerous question. Do I actually want this? Or did I learn to want it? Borrowed desires are powerful because they do not feel borrowed. They arrive wrapped in familiarity, reinforced by repetition, validated by everyone around you. From childhood, signals are sent about what success looks like, what happiness should include, what kind of life deserves admiration. These signals are not usually forced, they are modeled. You see what earns praise, what attracts attention, what is treated as failure, what is ignored. Slowly, the mind constructs a map of what is worth pursuing. This map becomes the foundation of motivation. Without realizing it, you begin moving toward destinations chosen by collective agreement rather than personal clarity. The career path that feels respectable, the lifestyle that looks impressive, the milestones that signal adulthood, the possessions that indicate arrival. Each step feels self-directed, yet the direction was suggested long before you started walking. Social approval plays a central role in this process. Humans evolved in groups where belonging meant survival. Being accepted reduced danger. Being rejected increased vulnerability. That ancient wiring still operates, even though the threats have changed. Approval now comes in the form of recognition, validation, and inclusion, so the mind learns to align desires with what brings acceptance. Over time, it becomes difficult to distinguish between what you genuinely value and what you value because it earns approval. The two blend together until questioning them feels like questioning reality itself. Media amplifies this effect. Images of ideal lives are presented repeatedly, shaping expectations about how life should look at different stages. You absorb these images passively, often without noticing the emotional impact. A standard is created, and anything outside that standard feels incomplete. Advertising takes advantage of this vulnerability by linking products to identity. You are not just buying an object, you are buying a version of yourself. The confident version, the admired version, the fulfilled version. The object becomes a symbol of belonging to a desired group. Ownership becomes proof that you are on the right path. But because these desires were not rooted in direct experience, satisfying them does not produce deep contentment. It produces temporary relief followed by confusion. You achieved what was supposed to matter, yet the expected transformation did not occur. The emptiness remains, now accompanied by doubt about what went wrong. The problem was not effort, it was direction. Borrowed desires often carry hidden assumptions about what life should feel like. They promise certainty, admiration, or security. But life rarely conforms to these narratives. When reality diverges from the script, frustration appears. You may blame yourself for not feeling satisfied, unaware that the script itself was unrealistic. Family expectations are another strong source of inherited wants. Parents project hopes onto children, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. They want stability, recognition, or redemption through the next generation. Even when these expectations are loving, they can create pressure to pursue paths that do not align with your inner inclinations. Breaking away from these expectations can feel like betrayal, even when it is necessary for authenticity. Guilt arises because loyalty is confused with compliance. The fear of disappointing others becomes a barrier to discovering what you truly want. Educational systems also contribute by rewarding specific types of achievement while overlooking others. You learn early which talents are celebrated and which are treated as distractions. This shapes self-perception. You may abandon interests that brought joy because they did not fit the definition of success provided to you. Peer influence reinforces conformity. Seeing friends pursue similar goals creates a sense that deviation is risky. Collective momentum carries you forward, even if a quiet part of you senses misalignment. It feels safer to move with the group than to pause and reevaluate. Over time, borrowed desires create a life that looks coherent from the outside, but feels fragmented from the inside. You may achieve visible success while feeling disconnected from the experience of living. Activities become obligations rather than expressions. Achievements feel hollow because they do not reflect your deeper nature. Buddhist reflections encourage examining the origin of desire rather than blindly following it. They suggest that clarity arises when you trace a longing back to its source. Was it born from direct curiosity, compassion, or creativity? Or was it absorbed from comparison, fear, or the need to belong? This examination is not about rejecting society or isolating yourself. It is about reclaiming authorship over your own direction. When you recognize which desires were implanted, you gain the freedom to choose whether they still serve you. One challenge is that genuine desires often feel quieter than borrowed ones. They do not shout for attention. They may appear simple, even ordinary. Because they are not fueled by external validation, they lack dramatic urgency. It takes patience to hear them beneath the noise of expectations. Another difficulty is uncertainty. When borrowed desires fade, there can be a period of not knowing what to pursue. This uncertainty is not emptiness, it is space. A space where authentic motivation can emerge, but only if you resist the impulse to fill it immediately with new borrowed goals. In that space, you begin to notice subtle preferences that were overshadowed before, activities that feel nourishing without needing justification, relationships that feel natural instead of strategic, moments that feel meaningful even if they do not contribute to a grand narrative. You also become more sensitive to how external influences shape your mood. Exposure to constant comparison may trigger dissatisfaction. Exposure to simplicity may restore calm. Recognizing these effects allows you to choose environments that support clarity rather than confusion. Reclaiming your own desires does not mean they will always be comfortable. Authentic paths can involve uncertainty, vulnerability, and resistance from others who are invested in the previous version of you. But they carry a sense of alignment that borrowed paths lack. Alignment does not guarantee ease, but it provides resilience. Effort feels purposeful rather than forced. Setbacks feel instructive rather than humiliating. Progress feels meaningful even without applause. Relationships may shift as well. Some connections were built around shared expectations rather than genuine understanding. As you become more authentic, certain dynamics may weaken while others deepen. This can feel unsettling, but it reflects a move toward connections based on presence rather than performance. You may also discover compassion for those still driven by borrowed desires. Recognizing how pervasive these influences are reduces judgment. Everyone is navigating layers of conditioning, often without realizing it. Awareness becomes a form of empathy rather than superiority. A quieter life may start to appeal to you, not as withdrawal, but as clarity. You become less interested in impressing and more interested in experiencing. Simplicity feels rich instead of lacking. Attention returns to things that were overlooked before: nature, creativity, genuine conversation, rest. Borrowed desires often distract from existential questions by keeping you busy. When the distraction fades, deeper questions arise about meaning, mortality, and connection. These questions can feel uncomfortable, but they also open the possibility of living with greater intentionality. You begin to see that meaning is not assigned by society, it is discovered through direct engagement with life. It emerges from how you relate to experience, not from how closely you follow a prescribed script. This realization reduces the need for constant validation. You no longer require others to confirm that your choices make sense. Internal coherence replaces external approval as the measure of direction. As clarity grows, desire becomes less about acquiring and more about expressing. You pursue what resonates, not what signals status. Creativity replaces comparison. Contribution replaces competition. The sense of lack that once fueled restless striving diminishes because you are no longer measuring yourself against borrowed standards. Life feels more immediate, less mediated by imagined expectations. You may still participate in society, still engage with responsibilities and ambitions, but the relationship changes. You are not driven by fear of missing out or fear of judgment. You are guided by understanding of what genuinely matters to you. And as this understanding deepens, another layer of the modern condition becomes visible. The environment itself has been engineered to intensify craving. Even when desires are authentic, they are constantly amplified by a world designed to keep attention restless. Which means the next challenge is not only to reclaim your desires, but to understand the system that keeps stimulating them without pause. As you begin to reclaim desires that actually belong to you, a deeper obstacle reveals itself, one that operates silently in the background of daily life. Even authentic longings struggle to breathe in an environment designed to keep your mind constantly stimulated. The world around you no longer waits for your attention, it competes for it. And in that competition, something essential begins to fade: the ability to feel satisfied by simple existence. There is a strange dullness that settles over ordinary moments now. Quiet evenings feel restless, slow conversations feel incomplete, doing nothing feels almost unbearable. It is not because life became less meaningful, it is because the mind has been trained to expect intensity at all times. The dopamine trap of modern life does not begin with a single habit. It emerges from a pattern of repeated stimulation that gradually rewires how pleasure and attention function. Dopamine is often described as the brain's reward signal, but its deeper role is anticipation. It motivates pursuit, not fulfillment. Every time you encounter something novel, surprising, or emotionally charged, dopamine spikes, pushing you toward engagement. In earlier environments, these spikes were tied to survival, finding food, solving problems, connecting with others. Now they are triggered by endless streams of information, entertainment, and novelty that require almost no effort. Your brain receives signals meant for meaningful achievements in response to scrolling, clicking, and consuming. Over time, the baseline shifts. Activities that once felt engaging start to feel flat because they cannot compete with the intensity of constant stimulation. Reading a book requires patience. Walking in nature unfolds slowly. Cooking a meal involves repetitive steps. Compared to rapid-fire content designed to capture attention instantly, these experiences may feel underwhelming at first. This is not because they lack value, it is because the brain's sensitivity has been altered. When dopamine spikes become frequent and artificial, the nervous system adjusts by reducing responsiveness. This process, called downregulation, means that ordinary pleasures no longer produce the same sense of reward. The result is a paradox. The more stimulation you consume, the less pleasure you feel overall. Buddhist reflections anticipated this dynamic long before neuroscience explained it. They describe how excessive sensory input agitates the mind, making contentment difficult. When the senses are constantly pulled outward, awareness loses depth. Attention becomes fragmented, jumping from one object to another without resting. Fragmented attention weakens presence. Without presence, experiences blur together. Meals are eaten while distracted. Conversations happen alongside background noise. Moments pass without being fully registered. Later, when you look back, the memory feels thin, as if you were not entirely there. This thinning of experience contributes to the sense that life is empty. It is not that life lacks richness. It is that richness requires sustained attention to perceive. When attention is conditioned to rapid shifts, sustained perception feels unnatural. Another layer of the dopamine trap is unpredictability. Many modern platforms operate on variable rewards. You never know what you will encounter next. This unpredictability keeps the brain engaged because it mimics the conditions that once made learning and exploration valuable. The possibility of something interesting appearing at any moment makes it hard to stop. This pattern trains impatience. Waiting becomes uncomfortable because the mind expects immediate input. Delayed gratification feels less rewarding because it lacks the constant reinforcement of novelty. Impatience spills into other areas of life. Goals that require long-term effort feel less appealing. Relationships that evolve gradually feel less exciting. Personal growth, which unfolds over years, can feel slow compared to the instant feedback loops available elsewhere. You may begin to crave intensity instead of depth. Intensity feels alive but fades quickly. Depth feels subtle but endures. The dopamine trap favors intensity, creating cycles of excitement followed by emptiness. To escape the emptiness, more stimulation is sought, restarting the cycle. Sleep is affected as well. Exposure to continuous stimulation keeps the nervous system activated, making it harder to transition into rest. Even when the body is tired, the mind may remain alert, scanning for new input. This reduces recovery, which in turn lowers emotional resilience, making you more susceptible to craving stimulation the next day. The trap also alters emotional regulation. When uncomfortable feelings arise, distraction becomes the default response. Instead of processing sadness, frustration, or uncertainty, you reach for something that shifts attention away. This avoidance prevents emotional integration, leaving underlying tensions unresolved. Unresolved tension increases the need for distraction, deepening dependency on stimulation. Buddhist practice emphasizes sitting with discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. This is not about enduring suffering unnecessarily. It is about understanding that discomfort often contains information. When you observe it directly, It changes. When you avoid it, it persists. Modern stimulation interferes with this process by offering constant exits. Every moment of boredom, loneliness, or anxiety can be numbed quickly, but numbing reduces sensitivity not only to pain, but also to joy. Emotional range narrows. You may notice that highs feel less intense than they once did, while lows linger. This imbalance creates the impression that something is wrong with life itself, when in reality, the nervous system is fatigued. Reconnecting with ordinary living requires recalibrating this system. It begins with reducing unnecessary stimulation, not as punishment, but as restoration. When the brain is given space to settle, sensitivity gradually returns. Simple experiences regain texture. Colors appear richer, sounds clearer, sensations more vivid. Silence becomes tolerable again, then peaceful. This recalibration also reveals how much stimulation was being used to avoid confronting deeper questions. Without constant input, thoughts surface that were previously drowned out. Questions about purpose, direction, mortality, connection. These questions can feel unsettling, but they are part of waking up from automatic living. Facing them directly can lead to clarity that no amount of distraction can provide. Another aspect of the dopamine trap is the commodification of attention. Your focus is treated as a resource to be captured and monetized. Systems are optimized to keep you engaged, not to enrich your life. Recognizing this shifts the narrative from personal weakness to structural influence. You are not failing to concentrate because you lack discipline. You are operating within an environment engineered to fragment attention. This awareness empowers you to set boundaries. Limiting exposure to certain inputs is not withdrawal, it is reclaiming cognitive autonomy. Choosing when and how to engage allows you to protect the quality of your inner life. As stimulation decreases, patience grows. Activities that once felt slow begin to reveal layers. Cooking becomes creative rather than routine. Walking becomes meditative rather than dull. Conversation becomes nourishing rather than obligatory. You start noticing subtle pleasures that were overshadowed before. The rhythm of breathing, the warmth of sunlight, the feeling of being present without needing to document it. These experiences are not dramatic, but they accumulate into a stable sense of well-being that does not depend on constant novelty. Relationships benefit as well. When attention is not divided, listening deepens. Presence communicates care more effectively than words. Shared silence becomes comfortable instead of awkward. Connection becomes less performative and more authentic. Work changes too. Instead of multitasking constantly, you engage fully with one task at a time. Productivity may initially feel slower, but quality improves. Satisfaction comes from completion rather than from juggling. The fear of missing out diminishes because you are no longer measuring life by the quantity of experiences consumed. Depth replaces accumulation as the measure of richness. There is also a spiritual dimension to this shift. Many traditions describe awakening as a return to simplicity, not as deprivation, but as clarity. When the noise subsides, the underlying quiet becomes apparent. This quiet is not emptiness, it is spaciousness. Within that spaciousness, awareness stabilizes. You become less reactive to impulses, less dependent on external stimulation for mood regulation. A sense of sufficiency emerges that feels independent of circumstances. Ordinary living stops feeling empty because emptiness was never in the activities themselves. It was in the overstimulated mind that could no longer perceive subtle meaning. Reclaiming sensitivity takes time. There may be withdrawal-like discomfort as the nervous system adjusts. Boredom may surface, followed by restlessness. Staying with this phase is essential because it precedes renewal. Gradually, boredom transforms into curiosity. Restlessness transforms into energy. The mind regains the ability to rest in experience without demanding constant change. You begin to appreciate cycles, activity and rest, engagement and solitude, stimulation and stillness. Balance replaces extremes. This balance allows authentic desires to re-emerge without being drowned out by artificial ones. You can pursue meaningful goals without losing contact with the present. Effort and ease coexist. As this process deepens, you realize that the problem was not technology, entertainment, or pleasure themselves, but unconscious consumption. When engagement becomes intentional, these tools can enrich life instead of depleting it. Awareness becomes the safeguard. It helps you notice when stimulation is serving growth and when it is masking discomfort. It allows you to step back before the cycle intensifies. The dopamine trap loosens not through rejection of modern life, but through conscious participation in it. You use tools without letting them use you. You enjoy stimulation without depending on it for identity or escape. And as your relationship with stimulation changes, another subtle distinction becomes clear. There is a difference between desire that pulls you unconsciously and desire that is observed with awareness. One leads to entanglement, the other opens the possibility of freedom. As the noise of constant stimulation begins to quiet down, a more subtle discovery appears. The problem was never desire itself. It was the way desire moved through you without being seen. The same force that once controlled your choices can become something entirely different when it is observed clearly. One path leads deeper into compulsion, the other opens into a quiet kind of freedom that does not depend on getting what you want. There is a moment, almost invisible, when a desire first appears, a small pull in the mind, a suggestion, a tension pointing toward something. Most of the time, this moment passes unnoticed. Action follows automatically, as if a script has already been written. You reach for the phone, open another tab, check again, plan again, pursue again. It feels like you decided, but the decision was already in motion before awareness arrived. Desire without awareness functions like gravity. It pulls without asking permission. It narrows attention so that the object of desire appears larger than everything else. Consequences fade into the background, alternatives disappear. The mind becomes single-tracked, convinced that satisfaction lies just ahead. In this state, desire does not feel optional. It feels necessary, urgent, important. You may even build arguments to justify it, not realizing that the arguments were created after the impulse, not before. The mind becomes a lawyer defending a case it did not choose. Buddhist teachings describe this as being carried by the current instead of seeing the river. The movement feels natural because you have known nothing else. But natural does not mean free. Compulsion can feel normal when it has been present for years. One sign of desire without awareness is the collapse of time. The future becomes exaggerated. The present becomes a bridge to cross as quickly as possible. Everything that does not contribute to obtaining the object feels like an obstacle. Patience disappears. Presence disappears. Only anticipation remains. This anticipation is often mistaken for motivation, but they are not the same. Motivation can be calm, steady, purposeful. Anticipation is restless, tense, driven by the fear of missing out or falling behind. It keeps the nervous system activated even when action is not possible. Another sign is emotional volatility. When desire dominates, mood fluctuates based on progress toward the goal. Small setbacks feel like personal failures. Minor successes feel disproportionately rewarding. Stability becomes rare because emotional balance depends on external conditions. Relationships can suffer in this state. People become means to an end rather than ends in themselves. You may listen only to gather information useful for your pursuit. Conversations become strategic rather than sincere. Empathy weakens because attention is elsewhere. Physical sensations also change. The body tightens, breathing becomes shallow, sleep becomes restless. Desire without awareness keeps the organism in a subtle fight-or-flight mode, even when no real danger exists. Despite these costs, The cycle persists because occasional rewards reinforce it. When you finally obtain what you want, relief floods the system. This relief is interpreted as proof that the chase was justified. The mind stores the memory and repeats the pattern later, overlooking the exhaustion that preceded it. Desire with witnessing operates differently. The impulse still appears, but instead of merging with it, you notice it. You feel the tension in the body, the thoughts forming around it, the urgency rising. Nothing is suppressed, nothing is indulged immediately. There is simply observation. Observation creates space. In that space, the automatic chain between impulse and action weakens. You begin to see that desire is not a command, but a movement that can be experienced without obeying. This witnessing is not cold detachment. It is intimate attention without entanglement. You are present with the sensation of wanting the way you would be present with a passing storm, aware of its intensity, but not convinced it defines the sky. As you stay with the sensation, something unexpected happens. Desire changes. It pulses, fluctuates, sometimes intensifies, sometimes dissolves on its own. You realize it is not as solid as it appeared. It is a process, not an identity. This realization reduces fear. You no longer believe that if you do not act immediately, something essential will be lost. You trust that urges can arise and pass without controlling you. With witnessing, time expands again. The present moment regains depth because it is no longer overshadowed by anticipation. Decisions become deliberate instead of reactive. You act because you choose to, not because you are pushed. Freedom emerges from this shift. Not freedom from desire, but freedom within desire. You can pursue what matters without being consumed by it. You can enjoy pleasure without fearing its absence. You can let go without feeling deprived. There is also a sense of dignity in this freedom. You are not at war with yourself, trying to suppress impulses through force. You are working with awareness, which transforms the relationship rather than the surface behavior. Witnessing reveals the difference between healthy aspiration and compulsive craving. Aspiration feels open, creative, connected to values. Craving feels tight, urgent, disconnected from context. One expands life, the other narrows it. Over time, the nervous system recalibrates. Without constant reactivity, stress levels decrease. Sleep deepens. Breathing slows. The body recognizes safety not as the absence of desire, but as the presence of awareness. Another transformation occurs in how you relate to pleasure. Instead of chasing intense experiences, you begin to appreciate subtle ones. A warm drink, a quiet room, a meaningful conversation. Pleasure becomes less about escape and more about contact with reality. Pain also becomes more manageable. When discomfort arises, witnessing prevents panic. You observe the sensation without amplifying it with catastrophic thoughts. This reduces suffering even when circumstances remain challenging. Buddhist practice often compares awareness to a lamp in a dark room. The lamp does not eliminate objects, it makes them visible. Once visible, they lose the power they had when hidden. Desire illuminated by awareness cannot operate with the same force. There is a common fear that witnessing will make life dull or passive. In reality, it makes engagement more authentic. When actions are not driven by compulsion, energy is available for creativity, compassion, and curiosity. You may discover interests that were overshadowed by dominant pursuits. You may reconnect with activities that bring quiet joy rather than dramatic excitement. Life becomes less about peaks and more about continuity. Witnessing also deepens relationships. Without the constant background of personal agenda, you can meet others as they are. Listening becomes fuller. Presence becomes a gift rather than a tactic. Conflict changes too. Instead of reacting defensively, you notice the surge of emotion before responding. This pause can prevent unnecessary harm and open space for understanding. Over time, identity shifts from being the one who wants to being the one who is aware of wanting. This subtle change dissolves the sense of being trapped inside your own mind. Thoughts and impulses are experienced as events, not as definitions. Spiritual traditions describe this as awakening from identification with the stream of consciousness. You still participate in the stream, but you are no longer swept away by every current. This awakening does not remove challenges from life. You still face uncertainty, loss, and change, but you face them with a steadiness that comes from not being driven blindly by desire. Freedom in this context is not the absence of constraints. It is the ability to respond consciously within constraints. It is the difference between reacting and choosing. You begin to trust that awareness itself is sufficient guidance. You do not need constant external validation or internal pressure to know what matters. Clarity arises naturally when the mind is not clouded by urgency. There is also a humility in this state. You recognize how easily awareness can fade and reactivity can return. Instead of striving for perfection, you cultivate attentiveness moment by moment. Practices such as mindful breathing, reflective pauses, and intentional slowing support this cultivation. They are not rituals for their own sake, but reminders to return to witnessing. As witnessing stabilizes, the world appears less threatening and less demanding. You realize that many pressures were amplified by internal reactivity. When reactivity decreases, situations reveal more nuance. You become less susceptible to manipulation because you notice emotional triggers before they escalate. Marketing tactics, social pressure, and fear-based messaging lose their grip when you can observe your responses in real time. This clarity extends to moral choices as well. Actions guided by awareness consider long-term consequences and the well-being of others, not just immediate gratification. Ultimately, the difference between desire without awareness and desire with witnessing is the difference between being driven and being guided. One reduces life to a series of compulsions. The other opens life as a field of possibilities. You do not have to eliminate desire to be free. You only need to see it clearly enough that it cannot pretend to be your master. And as this freedom deepens, a new question arises. If desire can be witnessed rather than obeyed, what happens when you stop measuring your life against others' desires entirely? Because comparison has been quietly shaping the intensity of your wanting all along. As awareness grows and you begin to see desire instead of being pulled by it, another force becomes visible. One that quietly reshapes what you want without asking permission. Even when you stop chasing blindly, the mind can still feel unsettled for a different reason. It keeps glancing sideways, measuring, evaluating, calculating where you stand. Freedom from compulsion reveals a deeper habit that has been there all along, the habit of defining your life through other people's lives. There is a specific kind of pain that does not come from loss, failure, or hardship, but from seeing someone else have what you do not. It can arise even when your own life is stable, even when nothing is objectively wrong. A simple image, a success story, a passing comment can trigger it. Suddenly, what felt sufficient moments ago begins to feel inadequate. Comparison operates like a lens that distorts reality. It does not show you the full picture of another person's life. It shows selected fragments, usually the most polished ones. Yet, the mind treats these fragments as evidence that something is missing in your own existence. This process happens quickly, often below conscious awareness. You scroll, you listen, you observe, and the brain starts ranking. Who is ahead? Who is behind? Who is winning? Who is struggling? It is a reflex shaped by evolution, where status once determined access to resources and safety. In modern life, the stakes are different, but the mechanism remains. Buddhist reflections describe comparison as a root of suffering because it ties contentment to conditions outside your control. Your peace becomes dependent on how your life measures against an ever-changing standard. Since the standard shifts constantly, stability becomes impossible. One moment you feel proud of your progress. The next moment you encounter someone further along, and pride turns into doubt. This fluctuation creates emotional turbulence that has little to do with your actual circumstances. Comparison also interferes with gratitude. Gratitude requires attention to what is present and valuable. Comparison redirects attention to what is absent. Even abundance can feel insufficient when viewed through the lens of someone else's greater abundance. Social environments intensify this effect. Conversations often revolve around achievements, possessions, and milestones. Without intending harm, people present curated versions of their lives. You compare your unfiltered reality to their highlights, forgetting that they are doing the same with others. Technology amplifies exposure to these highlights. You can witness thousands of lives in a single day, each offering a different benchmark. The mind cannot process this volume without becoming disoriented. It loses track of what normal looks like. This disorientation leads to a persistent sense of falling behind. There is always someone younger achieving more, someone wealthier enjoying more, someone more admired receiving more attention. The sheer scale of comparison opportunities makes it impossible to feel settled. Comparison does not only target success, it also targets identity. Appearance, personality, lifestyle, relationships, even spiritual progress can become arenas for measurement. You may start questioning your worth based on how closely you resemble an idealized version of someone else. This questioning erodes authenticity. Instead of expressing your natural inclinations, you adjust behavior to match perceived expectations. Life becomes performance rather than participation. Relationships suffer under this pressure. Instead of celebrating others' achievements, you may feel threatened by them. Envy can coexist with affection, creating inner conflict. You may withdraw or compete instead of connecting. Comparison also distorts perception of effort. You see outcomes without witnessing the process behind them. Someone's success appears effortless because the struggle was not visible. This creates unrealistic expectations for your own progress. When your journey includes setbacks, you interpret them as personal deficiencies rather than as normal parts of growth. The gap between expectation and reality widens, fueling frustration. Another consequence is decision paralysis. With so many models of how life could unfold, choosing a path becomes intimidating. Fear of choosing the wrong path intensifies because there is always evidence of someone succeeding in a different direction. This fear can lead to chronic dissatisfaction regardless of what you choose. If you pursue one path, you wonder about the alternatives. If you change direction, you worry about lost time. The mind keeps scanning for confirmation that you made the optimal choice, which rarely comes. Comparison also undermines presence. When attention is focused on relative standing, the experience of the moment loses importance. Activities are evaluated based on how they contribute to status rather than how they feel intrinsically. You may attend events, pursue hobbies, or build connections primarily for their symbolic value. Joy becomes secondary to image. Over time, this disconnect creates a sense of hollowness, as if life is happening behind a glass wall. Buddhist teachings encourage shifting from comparison to compassion. Recognizing that everyone experiences struggle reduces the tendency to idealize others. When you see that success does not eliminate insecurity or pain, the urge to measure weakens. Compassion also redirects attention inward. Instead of asking how you rank, you ask what genuinely supports well-being for yourself and others. This shift restores meaning to actions that might otherwise feel insignificant. Another antidote is recognizing uniqueness. Each life unfolds under different conditions, influences, and constraints. Comparing outcomes without considering these differences is like comparing different species of plants and expecting them to grow at the same rate. Understanding this does not eliminate ambition, it grounds it in reality. You pursue improvement relative to your own circumstances rather than relative to someone else's trajectory. Comparison often disguises itself as inspiration. While inspiration can motivate growth, comparison carries a subtle undertone of inadequacy. The difference lies in emotional quality. Inspiration energizes without diminishing self-worth. Comparison drains energy while amplifying self-doubt. Learning to distinguish between the two helps you choose influences wisely. You can admire others' achievements without turning them into judgments about yourself. Solitude plays a role in healing comparison. Time away from constant exposure allows your internal compass to recalibrate. Without external noise, you can hear quieter signals about what matters to you. In solitude, simple activities regain meaning because they are no longer evaluated through social metrics. Reading, walking, creating, resting, these become ends in themselves rather than means to validation. Contentment begins to grow from direct experience rather than from relative positioning. You start noticing that peace does not require superiority. It requires alignment between values and actions. Comparison also loses power when you recognize impermanence. Status, beauty, wealth, influence all fluctuate. Anchoring identity to any of these creates vulnerability. When they change, the sense of self wavers. Awareness of impermanence encourages investing in qualities that endure: kindness, wisdom, presence, integrity. These qualities are less susceptible to comparison because they are expressed through behavior rather than through external markers. Over time, the need to measure fades. You still observe differences, but they no longer define your worth. You can celebrate others without diminishing yourself. You can acknowledge your limitations without shame. Freedom from comparison does not isolate you from society. It allows you to engage without losing yourself. You participate from a place of stability rather than from insecurity. Gratitude deepens because it is no longer conditional. You appreciate what exists without needing it to surpass someone else's version. Joy becomes quieter but more reliable. This shift also enhances generosity. When you are not preoccupied with protecting status, you can support others genuinely. Collaboration replaces competition. Shared success feels meaningful instead of threatening. As comparison loosens its grip, time feels less pressured. You stop racing against invisible timelines dictated by others' milestones. Your pace becomes responsive to your own needs and capacities. You begin to trust that life does not require constant validation to be worthwhile. Meaning arises from engagement, not from ranking. And as this trust grows, another layer of dissatisfaction becomes visible. Not from comparing yourself to others, but from comparing yourself to an imagined version of who you think you should have been. A quieter grief waits there, shaped not by external measurement, but by internal expectation. As comparison with others begins to loosen, attention turns inward, and what you find there can feel even heavier. It is not about who is ahead or behind anymore. It is about a silent image that has followed you for years, the version of yourself you believed you would become by now. This image does not live in reality. It lives in memory, in expectation, in unfinished plans. And the distance between that imagined self and the person you are today can feel like a quiet loss no one else can see. There is a particular sadness that comes from realizing life did not unfold the way you once pictured it. Not dramatic regret, not obvious failure, but a subtle ache that appears when you reflect on roads not taken, chances missed, talents unused, courage withheld. You may not talk about it openly, yet it lingers in moments of stillness. Attachment to potential selves begins early, when possibilities feel endless. As a child or young adult, you carry visions of what you might become: successful, admired, fulfilled, extraordinary. These visions are not harmful in themselves. They provide direction and energy. But over time, life introduces constraints, responsibilities, unexpected turns. Choices narrow possibilities. Reality shapes the path in ways imagination did not anticipate. When those early visions remain emotionally charged, they can become benchmarks against which your present life is judged. Instead of appreciating what has been built, attention fixates on what could have been. The mind constructs an alternate timeline where different decisions led to a more impressive or satisfying outcome. This alternate timeline is seductive because it is free from complexity. It contains only the highlights, not the struggles that would have accompanied them. It feels pure because it never had to face reality. Comparing your real life to this imagined one creates a sense of deficiency that no actual achievement can resolve. Buddhist reflections describe this as clinging to illusions of permanence and control. The mind wants to believe that life could have unfolded perfectly if only certain variables had been different. But life is shaped by countless conditions beyond personal intention. Recognizing this does not erase responsibility, it contextualizes it. The imagined self often represents more than missed opportunities. It represents unmet emotional needs, the desire to feel valued, understood, secure, significant. Achievements were seen as pathways to these feelings. When the achievements did not occur, the underlying needs remained unsatisfied. This is why attachment to potential selves can feel like grief. It is grief for experiences never lived, recognition never received, possibilities never realized. Unlike other forms of grief, it has no clear rituals for closure because nothing tangible was lost, yet the emotional weight is real. This grief can influence present behavior in subtle ways. You may hesitate to pursue new opportunities because part of you believes it is already too late. You may avoid reflecting on your life because the gap feels painful. You may cling to routines that numb the discomfort instead of confronting it. Perfectionism often grows from this attachment. If the ideal self cannot be reached anymore, the mind may try to preserve the remaining possibilities by avoiding risk. Better to do nothing than to confirm that perfection is unattainable. This avoidance protects the illusion but restricts growth. Another reaction is overcompensation. You may push yourself relentlessly, trying to make up for lost time. This urgency can lead to burnout because it is fueled by regret rather than by genuine inspiration. Even success achieved this way may feel hollow, as if it arrived too late to matter. Attachment to potential selves also distorts memory. The past is edited to emphasize mistakes and overlook resilience. You may forget the challenges you overcame, the relationships you nurtured, the quiet contributions you made. The narrative becomes one of insufficiency rather than complexity. Buddhist teachings encourage seeing life as a process rather than as a linear progression toward an ideal. When you view your path as unfolding conditions rather than as deviations from a perfect plan, compassion replaces self-judgment. You recognize that every choice was made with the awareness and resources available at the time. This perspective allows you to reinterpret the past not as failure, but as experience. Lessons learned through hardship may become sources of wisdom. Detours may have led to connections or insights that would not have been possible otherwise. Another step toward freedom is acknowledging that the imagined self was never fully defined. It was a projection shaped by limited understanding of what life would demand. Holding yourself accountable to a vision formed under different circumstances is inherently unfair. You also begin to see that identity is not fixed by past decisions. The capacity for change persists as long as awareness is present. While certain opportunities may no longer exist, new ones can emerge that align with your current reality rather than with outdated expectations. Acceptance does not mean resignation. It means releasing the belief that worth depends on becoming someone else. From acceptance, action can arise without the burden of self-rejection. Presence becomes the ground for renewal. Instead of asking who you should have been, you ask who you are now and what matters from this point forward. This question is quieter but more actionable. Creativity can flourish in this space. Without the pressure to match an ideal, you explore possibilities that feel authentic rather than impressive. You may discover interests that were previously dismissed because they did not fit the original narrative. Relationships also deepen when you stop performing for an imagined standard. You allow yourself to be seen as you are, with imperfections and uncertainties. This vulnerability invites genuine connection instead of admiration based on image. There is also relief in recognizing that everyone carries unrealized potential. The difference is not in whether possibilities were lost, but in how they are integrated into the story of one's life. Some people carry them as burdens, others carry them as reminders of human complexity. Compassion for yourself naturally extends to others. You see that behind many confident appearances are similar doubts and regrets. This understanding reduces isolation and fosters empathy. Gratitude begins to shift from what could have been to what is still here: relationships, abilities, experiences, time. Even limitations can become sources of appreciation when they are seen as conditions that shaped resilience. Spiritual traditions often emphasize the present moment as the only place transformation can occur. Attachment to potential selves anchors attention in the past or in hypothetical futures, preventing engagement with the only moment that can be influenced. When attention returns to the present, energy becomes available for meaningful action. You may still honor past dreams, but without clinging to them as measures of worth. They become part of your story, not its conclusion. Forgiveness plays a role as well. Forgiving yourself for not knowing what you could not have known, for not acting with wisdom you had not yet gained, for being human in situations that demanded more than anyone could give. Forgiveness releases the emotional grip of regret. You may also recognize that the person you are now carries qualities the imagined self did not anticipate: patience, humility, depth, understanding. These qualities often arise from experiences that once felt like setbacks. Over time, the imagined self loses its authority. It becomes one possibility among many, rather than the standard by which all others are judged. The present self gains legitimacy, not because it matches an ideal, but because it exists. This shift allows life to feel open again. Instead of mourning what did not happen, you engage with what is still unfolding. Curiosity replaces nostalgia. Hope becomes grounded rather than speculative. You begin to see that fulfillment does not require becoming extraordinary in a conventional sense. It can emerge from authenticity, contribution, and connection, qualities accessible regardless of past decisions. And as attachment to potential selves softens, another pattern reveals itself: the habit of postponing happiness until some future condition is met, as if life will truly begin later rather than now. As the grip of the person you thought you should have been begins to loosen, another pattern comes into focus, one that quietly shaped how you moved through every stage of life. It is the habit of postponing peace, of placing contentment somewhere ahead, as if happiness were a reward waiting at the end of a long negotiation. You start to notice how often your mind has said, "Not now, later, when things are finally right." There is a quiet sentence that lives in the background of many lives. It sounds hopeful, but it carries a hidden cost. When I finally get there, then I will relax. When I finally fix this, then I will feel okay. When I finally become that person, then life will begin. It feels motivating, almost responsible, because it promises discipline and progress. Yet underneath, it is a refusal to allow peace in the present. Future-based happiness begins as a coping strategy. When circumstances are difficult, imagining a better future provides relief. It gives direction when the present feels uncertain. But when this strategy becomes permanent, it turns into a prison. Instead of moving through life, you start waiting for it. Waiting becomes your default state. You wake up thinking about what must be solved before you can feel calm. You work toward milestones that promise emotional resolution. You tell yourself that rest must be earned, that joy must be justified, that contentment must be delayed until everything is in order. But everything is never fully in order. Life continues to present new challenges, new uncertainties, new responsibilities. Each time one issue resolves, another emerges. The finish line shifts, as described earlier, but now it shifts in terms of emotional permission. Peace is always postponed because conditions are never perfect. Buddhist reflections identify this as a misunderstanding of where happiness originates. When happiness is treated as a future event, the present moment becomes a tool rather than a place of living. Activities are evaluated based on how quickly they move you toward that imagined state. This creates chronic tension. Even positive experiences are overshadowed by the awareness that they are temporary or incomplete. You may struggle to enjoy success because part of your mind is already focused on maintaining it or surpassing it. Relationships can suffer as well. When attention is anchored in future goals, connection in the present feels secondary. You may listen while planning, interact while worrying, celebrate while anticipating the next step. Others sense this absence even if they cannot articulate it. Future-based happiness also fuels anxiety. If peace depends on outcomes that have not occurred yet, uncertainty becomes threatening. You feel compelled to control variables, predict possibilities, prepare for scenarios that may never happen. The mind becomes a strategist rather than a witness. This constant strategizing drains energy. Instead of responding to life as it unfolds, you are preoccupied with simulations of what might happen. The body remains tense because the imagined future cannot be resolved in the present. Another consequence is diminished appreciation. When satisfaction is tied to future achievements, current blessings feel provisional. You tell yourself you will appreciate them later once the bigger problems are solved. Later rarely arrives because new goals replace old ones. There is also a subtle arrogance in the belief that life will become manageable at some point. It assumes that uncertainty is temporary rather than inherent. When uncertainty persists, frustration grows because reality does not match expectation. Future-based happiness can disguise itself as responsibility. You may believe that delaying joy is necessary to ensure success or security. While planning and discipline are valuable, they do not require emotional deprivation. The assumption that suffering now guarantees happiness later is rarely examined. Many people reach the goals they thought would solve everything, only to discover that the emotional landscape remains unchanged. They feel confused or ashamed, believing they should be happier. This confusion arises because the internal patterns were not addressed, only the external conditions. Buddhist teachings emphasize that peace is a quality of awareness, not a product of circumstances. It can coexist with difficulty, uncertainty, and imperfection. When this is understood, the need to wait dissolves. You begin to notice small openings for contentment that were previously ignored. A quiet morning, a shared laugh, a moment of stillness. These experiences do not require completion of any checklist. They exist independently of achievement. Allowing yourself to feel them can feel strange at first, almost irresponsible. The mind may protest, insisting that there is work to do, problems to solve, goals to reach. But gradually, you realize that peace does not interfere with action. It enhances clarity and resilience. Acting from calm produces different results than acting from tension. Decisions become more thoughtful, communication more patient, creativity more accessible. The energy once consumed by worry becomes available for engagement. Future-based happiness often erodes physical well-being. Chronic stress affects sleep, digestion, immunity. The body lives in a state of preparation rather than restoration. When peace is postponed indefinitely, recovery never fully occurs. Reclaiming present peace involves retraining attention. Instead of constantly scanning ahead, you practice returning to what is happening now. This does not eliminate planning, but it prevents planning from dominating consciousness. Mindfulness practices serve this purpose by anchoring awareness in sensory experience: breathing, movement, sound, touch. These anchors remind the mind that life is not only thoughts about the future. Another step is redefining success. Instead of measuring it solely by external milestones, you include qualities such as presence, kindness, balance, and integrity. These qualities are accessible in every moment, not just after achievements. Gratitude becomes a powerful counterbalance. By acknowledging what is already sufficient, you weaken the belief that fulfillment requires additional conditions. Gratitude shifts focus from absence to presence. Letting go of the fantasy of "when I finally" does not mean abandoning goals. It means refusing to postpone life until they are achieved. You pursue them while allowing yourself to experience peace along the way. This approach transforms the journey. Progress becomes meaningful because it is not driven by desperation. Setbacks become tolerable because they do not threaten your emotional foundation. You also become more adaptable. When unexpected changes occur, you adjust without feeling that your entire future collapsed. Stability comes from awareness rather than from fixed plans. Relationships deepen when you are not mentally elsewhere. People feel seen and valued because your attention is not divided. Shared experiences become richer because they are not overshadowed by anticipation. There is a humility in accepting that life may never align perfectly with your expectations. This humility reduces conflict with reality. Instead of resisting what is, you work with it. As present peace stabilizes, you discover that happiness is not a peak to reach, but a capacity to cultivate. It grows from engagement with life as it unfolds, not from waiting for ideal conditions. You begin to trust that meaningful moments do not need to be earned. They are available whenever awareness is open. This trust reduces the urgency to control outcomes. The fantasy of "when I finally" loses its power because you no longer believe that fulfillment is stored in the future. The future becomes a continuation of the present rather than an escape from it. This shift also reveals how much time was spent in anticipation instead of participation. You may feel a mix of regret and relief. Regret for moments missed, relief that it is not too late to live differently. Forgiveness becomes important here as well. Forgiving yourself for believing the promises of future-based happiness, for postponing joy in the name of responsibility, for not knowing another way. With forgiveness, the past stops interfering with the present. You can engage with life without carrying the burden of how it should have been. Peace becomes less fragile because it is not dependent on circumstances aligning. It becomes a background state that supports action rather than waiting for it to end. And as this understanding deepens, another insight emerges. Many of the things pursued as solutions to inner discomfort were actually substitutes, distractions meant to avoid facing pain directly. The next layer of reflection reveals how achievement, pleasure, and possession can become emotional shields rather than sources of genuine fulfillment. As the illusion of future-based happiness begins to dissolve, a more uncomfortable truth starts to surface. Many of the things pursued were not really about growth, security, or joy. They were ways to keep certain feelings at a distance. When the mind stops projecting peace into the future, it finally has to face what has been quietly waiting underneath, the pain that was never given space to be felt. There is a moment when distractions lose their power. The achievements, the purchases, the constant activity no longer produce the same relief. You notice a silence behind them, a hollow echo that asks a question you have been avoiding. If all of this was supposed to fix something, why does the discomfort return as soon as the excitement fades? Emotional substitutes are strategies the mind develops to avoid direct contact with pain. Instead of addressing the source of discomfort, attention shifts towards something that promises temporary relief. This can take many forms: working excessively to outrun feelings of inadequacy, seeking pleasure to numb loneliness, accumulating possessions to create a sense of control. These substitutes are not random. They are chosen because they provide immediate feedback. Achievement brings praise, pleasure brings sensation, possessions bring visible proof of progress. Each creates a momentary shift in mood that feels like progress even when nothing fundamental has changed. Buddhist reflections describe this as mistaking stimulation for healing. Relief is confused with resolution. The nervous system calms temporarily, but the underlying tension remains intact. When the substitute fades, the original discomfort reappears, often stronger because it was postponed. Achievement is one of the most socially rewarded substitutes. Productivity is praised, ambition is admired, success is celebrated. Because of this, it can be difficult to recognize when striving is driven by avoidance rather than by genuine purpose. You may tell yourself that you are building a better life while quietly using busyness to avoid being alone with your thoughts. The problem is not achievement itself, but the belief that it will erase inner conflict. When accomplishments become emotional anesthesia, they lose their ability to satisfy. Each new goal must be larger than the last to produce the same distraction, creating a cycle of escalation. Pleasure operates in a similar way, but with different tools. Food, entertainment, substances, sensory indulgence, all can provide quick relief from discomfort. The brain associates these experiences with safety because they interrupt distress signals. Over time, reliance on pleasure to regulate emotion can dull sensitivity to ordinary joys. Possessions add another layer. Owning things can create a sense of stability and identity. Objects become symbols of worth, protection against uncertainty, reminders that you are progressing. Yet objects cannot address emotional wounds. They can only decorate the space around them. Emotional substitutes also shape identity. You may start defining yourself by what you do, what you consume, what you own. This identity feels solid because it is visible, measurable, recognized by others. But it requires constant maintenance. Without new achievements or acquisitions, the sense of self feels threatened. This dependency creates anxiety. You fear losing momentum because stillness would expose what has been avoided. Rest becomes uncomfortable because it removes the distractions that kept pain out of awareness. Relationships can become entangled in this dynamic as well. You may seek validation from others to compensate for self-doubt, or use social interaction to escape solitude. When connections are based on emotional substitution rather than on authenticity, they feel fragile. Buddhist teachings encourage turning toward pain rather than away from it. This does not mean dwelling on suffering, but acknowledging its presence without immediately trying to eliminate it. Pain often carries information about unmet needs, unresolved experiences, or internal conflicts. When you allow yourself to feel discomfort without replacing it with distraction, something unexpected happens. The intensity often decreases on its own. Emotions move through the body when they are not resisted. Avoidance prolongs them, attention transforms them. Learning to sit with discomfort requires patience because the mind is accustomed to immediate relief. You may feel exposed, uncertain, vulnerable. Yet this vulnerability is the doorway to genuine healing. It allows insight to emerge instead of suppression. Awareness also reveals that many substitutes were attempts to secure love, safety, or belonging. Achievements sought approval. Pleasures sought comfort. Possessions sought protection. Recognizing these underlying needs helps you address them directly rather than indirectly. Self-compassion becomes essential here. Instead of judging yourself for coping imperfectly, you acknowledge that these strategies were attempts to survive emotionally. Compassion reduces shame, which often fuels further avoidance. As substitutes lose their dominance, space opens for healthier forms of regulation. Practices such as meditation, reflection, physical movement, creative expression, and honest conversation provide ways to process emotion rather than suppress it. Meditation trains the mind to observe sensations without reacting immediately. You learn that thoughts and feelings arise and pass without requiring action. This reduces the urgency to escape them. Physical movement releases tension stored in the body. Emotional pain is not only psychological, it has physiological components. Movement allows energy to circulate instead of stagnating. Creative expression gives form to experiences that may be difficult to articulate directly. Writing, art, music, or other forms of creation transform emotion into communication. This externalization can be deeply relieving. Honest conversation breaks isolation. Sharing vulnerabilities with trusted individuals reduces the burden of carrying them alone. It also reveals that others face similar struggles, counteracting the belief that something is uniquely wrong with you. Another important shift is redefining pleasure. Instead of using pleasure to escape, you learn to experience it as enrichment. Enjoyment becomes a complement to life rather than a substitute for unresolved feelings. Simplicity often becomes appealing. Activities that do not overstimulate, walking, listening, observing nature, engaging in mindful tasks, provide gentle nourishment without masking emotion. These experiences reconnect you with a quieter form of satisfaction. Possessions also take on new meaning. Instead of symbols of identity, they become tools for living. You choose them based on usefulness and appreciation rather than on emotional need. This reduces attachment and clutter, both physical and psychological. Achievement becomes aligned with values rather than with avoidance. You pursue goals because they matter, not because they distract. Success feels different when it is not burdened with the expectation of fixing everything. Gradually, inner pain transforms from an enemy into a teacher. It points toward areas that require attention and care. By listening to it, you develop resilience and understanding that cannot be gained through avoidance. This transformation does not eliminate difficulty. Life continues to present challenges, but your relationship with discomfort changes. Instead of panicking or numbing, you respond with curiosity and patience. Peace becomes more stable because it is not dependent on constant stimulation. It arises from acceptance of the full range of human experience, joy and sorrow, ease and struggle, certainty and doubt. You also become more present for others. When you are not preoccupied with managing your own discomfort, you can offer genuine empathy. Your presence becomes comforting because it is grounded rather than distracted. Freedom from emotional substitutes does not mean rejecting achievement, pleasure, or possessions. It means no longer expecting them to solve problems they were never designed to solve. They return to their proper roles as aspects of life, not as foundations of identity. As this clarity deepens, you notice another resistance emerging, a fear of quiet moments, as if silence itself might expose something unbearable. The absence of distraction can feel unsettling when the mind has been conditioned to constant movement. And this reveals the next layer of desire, not for things or achievements, but for noise, stimulation, and activity, anything that prevents stillness from revealing what lies beneath. As the need for distractions and emotional substitutes begins to fade, something unexpected can surface. A quiet discomfort that appears when nothing is demanding your attention. The noise is gone, the urgency is gone. Yet peace does not arrive immediately. Instead, there is a strange tension, as if the mind does not trust the silence. What was once desired now feels unfamiliar, even unsettling. There is a reason stillness can feel threatening. A mind that has spent years chasing stimulation becomes conditioned to movement. It expects constant input, constant activity, constant proof that something is happening. When those signals disappear, it interprets the absence as danger rather than as relief. Silence removes the usual escape routes. Without conversations, screens, tasks, or goals, there is nothing to project attention onto. Awareness turns inward, and this inward direction can feel exposed. Thoughts that were previously drowned out become audible. Emotions that were postponed return to the surface. Buddhist reflections describe this as encountering the untrained mind. Without the structure of external engagement, the mind reveals its habitual patterns: restlessness, worry, self-criticism, unfinished narratives. These patterns were always present, but activity kept them out of sight. The fear of stillness often begins with this confrontation. You realize how crowded the inner landscape has been. Silence does not create these thoughts. It simply stops covering them. This can feel overwhelming because there is no immediate solution, no action to take that will resolve everything at once. Another reason stillness feels uncomfortable is the loss of identity tied to productivity. Many people define themselves by what they accomplish. When nothing is being produced, a subtle question arises: who am I without activity? This question can provoke anxiety because it challenges long-held beliefs about worth. Activity provides a sense of control. Even if the tasks are minor, they create the impression of moving forward. Stillness, on the other hand, exposes uncertainty. Without motion, you cannot reassure yourself that you are improving, progressing, or securing the future. You are simply present without guarantees. The nervous system also plays a role. Constant stimulation keeps it in a state of alertness. When stimulation stops, the system does not immediately relax. It may remain tense, scanning for threats, searching for something to focus on. This physiological response reinforces the perception that silence is unsafe. Over time, avoidance of stillness becomes habitual. You fill gaps with noise, multitasking, background entertainment, unnecessary conversations. Even brief pauses are eliminated because they feel uncomfortable. The day becomes a continuous stream of input designed to prevent awareness from settling. This avoidance has consequences. Without stillness, there is no opportunity for integration. Experiences accumulate without being processed. Emotions remain unresolved. The mind becomes cluttered because it never has time to sort what it has absorbed. Stillness is where understanding deepens. It allows insights to surface that cannot emerge during distraction. It provides space for reflection, for recognizing patterns, for making sense of experiences. Without it, learning remains superficial. The fear of stillness is also tied to the fear of impermanence. Silence highlights the passage of time. When you stop filling every moment, you become aware of how quickly moments pass. This awareness can evoke existential anxiety, a reminder that life is finite and uncontrollable. Distraction functions as a buffer against this realization. By staying busy, you can avoid confronting the fragility of existence. Stillness removes that buffer, inviting contemplation of questions that have no simple answers. Buddhist teachings encourage embracing stillness not as an absence, but as a presence. Silence is not emptiness. It is a field in which experience becomes clearer. When you remain with it long enough, the initial discomfort often transforms into calm. The transition requires patience because the mind resists unfamiliar states. At first, stillness may intensify restlessness. Thoughts may accelerate as if trying to re-establish movement. The impulse to escape can feel urgent. Observing this impulse without acting on it is the beginning of freedom. Breathing becomes an anchor during this process. Focusing on the rhythm of breath provides a stable point amid mental turbulence. It reminds the body that safety is not dependent on activity. Gradually, tension begins to release. As stillness deepens, you may notice subtle sensations previously overshadowed: the feeling of air on skin, the sound of distant movement, the weight of the body supported by the ground. These details reconnect you with the present moment in a direct way. Emotions may also surface with greater clarity. Without distraction, you can feel sadness, joy, fatigue, relief more distinctly. This clarity can be uncomfortable, but it allows for authentic processing rather than suppression. Another discovery is that thoughts are not continuous when not fueled by stimulation. They arise, linger, and dissolve. The belief that you must engage with every thought weakens. You realize that awareness can exist without constant narration. This realization shifts your relationship with the mind. Instead of being carried by every impulse, you become a witness. Witnessing creates space between experience and reaction. In that space, freedom appears. Stillness also reveals how much energy was spent maintaining distraction. When that energy is released, you may feel both lighter and disoriented. Without familiar habits to fill time, you face the question of how to live intentionally rather than automatically. Creativity often emerges from this openness. Ideas form without pressure, connections appear between unrelated experiences, insights surface unexpectedly, the mind, no longer overloaded, can function more fluidly. Relationships benefit as well. When you are comfortable with stillness, you listen more deeply because you are not impatient to fill silence. Conversations become more meaningful because they are not rushed. The fear of stillness often masks a deeper fear, the fear of encountering yourself without filters. Distractions act as layers that define identity. Without them, you meet the raw experience of being alive with all its uncertainty and vulnerability. This encounter can be transformative. You see that identity is not fixed, but fluid. You are not only the roles you perform or the goals you pursue. You are also the awareness that observes them. Compassion naturally arises from this recognition. You understand your own struggles more gently, which extends to others. Judgment softens because you see how much effort goes into avoiding pain. Peace becomes less dependent on conditions. It is no longer something you must achieve through control or acquisition. It is a quality that emerges when resistance subsides. Stillness does not eliminate desire, but it changes its texture. Wants become less urgent, less tied to identity. You can pursue goals without feeling that your survival depends on them. There is also a sense of intimacy with life that distraction obscures. Ordinary experiences become vivid because attention is not divided. Eating, walking, resting, observing, these regain depth. Over time, silence becomes less threatening and more restorative. You begin to seek it not as an escape from life, but as a way to engage with life more fully. It becomes a place where you return to yourself. This transformation reveals that the mind's addiction to wanting was partly fueled by fear of what would happen if wanting stopped. Now you see that when wanting pauses, awareness remains. Existence continues without the constant push. With this understanding, you carry stillness into activity. Even in motion, there is an inner quiet that stabilizes perception. You respond rather than react. You choose rather than chase. And as stillness integrates into daily life, another insight begins to form. The realization that what you own, accumulate, and protect has often been used as armor against vulnerability, a way to defend a fragile sense of self against the uncertainty of being. As stillness becomes less frightening and you begin to feel at home in your own presence, another pattern quietly reveals itself. The way objects, achievements, and symbols were gathered not just for comfort, but for protection. In the silence, it becomes clear that many things you once called necessities were actually shields. They were ways to feel solid in a world that often feels uncertain, ways to build a visible structure around a self that sometimes felt fragile. There is a subtle reassurance that comes from ownership. When something is yours, it feels like an extension of your existence, your home, your devices, your clothes, your collections. Each item tells a story about who you are or who you want to be seen as. Ownership creates a boundary between you and the unpredictability outside. It says, "This is mine, this is stable, this is proof that I am established." Buddhist reflections describe this attachment to possessions as a response to insecurity about identity. When the sense of self feels unstable, external objects become anchors. They provide continuity in a life where everything else changes. If your role shifts, if relationships evolve, if circumstances fluctuate, the objects remain, offering the illusion of permanence. This illusion is powerful because it is visible. Internal qualities such as wisdom, kindness, or awareness are intangible and difficult to measure. Objects, on the other hand, can be counted, displayed, compared. They become evidence that you are progressing, that you matter, that you belong. Ownership also offers protection against judgment. When you possess symbols of success or status, you feel less exposed to criticism. It is as if the objects speak on your behalf, declaring your value before anyone has a chance to question it. Without them, you may fear being seen as insignificant or unprepared. The relationship between ownership and identity often begins early. Children attach to toys not only for enjoyment but for comfort. As adults, the objects change, but the emotional function can remain. A car may replace a toy, a home may replace a blanket, but the underlying need for security persists. Consumer culture amplifies this tendency by linking possessions to personal worth. Advertisements rarely sell products directly. They sell identities. They promise confidence, attractiveness, belonging, respect. The message is subtle but consistent. Acquiring the right things will protect you from feeling inadequate. This creates a cycle where insecurity fuels consumption, and consumption temporarily reduces insecurity. The relief fades, prompting the search for the next acquisition. Over time, accumulation becomes habitual, not because each item is necessary, but because the act of acquiring itself feels stabilizing. Ownership can also serve as a buffer against emotional vulnerability. When you feel uncertain about relationships or self-worth, focusing on material control feels safer. Objects do not reject you, misunderstand you, or change unpredictably. They remain where you place them, responding only to your decisions. However, this safety comes at a cost. The more identity is tied to possessions, the more fragile it becomes. Loss, damage, or comparison can trigger disproportionate distress because the objects were carrying emotional weight beyond their practical function. Minimal disruptions can feel threatening when they affect something symbolic. A broken device, a financial setback, or a change in living conditions can feel like an attack on the self rather than a manageable inconvenience. Ownership also influences behavior. You may choose paths that prioritize maintaining what you have rather than exploring new possibilities. Fear of losing stability can limit growth, creativity, and risk-taking. Life becomes centered around preservation rather than exploration. Relationships may also be affected. If possessions are used to define identity, interactions can become transactional. You may feel pressure to present a certain image or to evaluate others based on their symbols. Authentic connection becomes secondary to maintaining status. Buddhist teachings encourage examining the impermanence of all things, including possessions. Objects age, break, become obsolete, lose relevance. Recognizing this impermanence weakens the illusion that they can provide lasting security. Letting go does not mean rejecting material comfort or stability. It means understanding that objects cannot substitute for inner resilience. Security derived from awareness and adaptability is less vulnerable to external change. Gratitude shifts the focus from ownership to appreciation. Instead of defining yourself by what you possess, you appreciate how objects support your life. They become tools rather than extensions of identity. Simplicity often follows this shift. You begin to value quality of experience over quantity of accumulation. Space opens up, both physically and mentally, allowing attention to return to what truly matters. There is also a sense of relief in realizing that you do not have to maintain a certain image to be worthy. Without the burden of constant comparison and display, life feels lighter. Choices become guided by authenticity rather than by expectation. Generosity naturally increases when attachment loosens. Sharing resources becomes easier because they are no longer tied to self-worth. Giving feels like an expression of abundance rather than a loss. The environment benefits as well. Reduced consumption lessens strain on resources and encourages sustainable living. This alignment between personal well-being and collective responsibility creates a deeper sense of purpose. Ownership as psychological armor often masks a fear of emptiness. Without the objects, who are you? Facing this question can feel unsettling, but it also opens the door to discovering identity beyond external markers. Identity grounded in awareness is flexible. It adapts to change without losing coherence. You are no longer defined by what you have, but by how you relate to experience. This shift also enhances resilience. When circumstances change, you adjust without feeling that your foundation collapsed. Stability comes from within rather than from external arrangements. As attachment to possessions softens, appreciation for non-material experiences deepens. Time, attention, relationships, creativity, learning, these become primary sources of meaning. They cannot be owned, only lived. Stillness becomes richer because it is not filled with the urge to acquire or protect. Presence becomes enough. You begin to see that the self you were trying to defend did not need armor, only understanding. And as this understanding settles, another pattern becomes visible. The way desire itself often serves as a distraction from confronting the reality that everything changes, that loss is inevitable, and that no possession or identity can shield you from impermanence. As the need to protect identity through ownership begins to soften, a deeper discomfort starts to surface, not about what you have, but about what you cannot keep. Beneath the urge to accumulate and secure lies a quiet fear that nothing truly stays, that everything you rely on will eventually change, fade, or disappear. When this truth comes closer to awareness, the mind often responds by wanting more, not because more is needed, but because wanting itself creates the illusion of moving away from loss. There is something deeply unsettling about impermanence. Relationships shift, bodies age, roles dissolve, circumstances transform without asking permission. Even the things that once felt solid slowly reveal their fragility. Desire becomes a way to look in another direction, a strategy to stay occupied so that the reality of change does not fully register. Wanting more feels active, hopeful, forward-moving. Facing impermanence feels still, uncertain, exposed. The mind naturally gravitates toward activity because it feels safer than surrender. If you are pursuing something, you are not dwelling on what might be slipping away. Buddhist reflections describe desire as a response to the discomfort of transience. Instead of accepting that life is fluid, the mind tries to stabilize it through acquisition, achievement, and control. Each new pursuit promises continuity, a sense that something enduring is being built against the tide of change. This is why major life transitions often trigger intensified desire. When you sense that a chapter is ending, a relationship evolving, a career shifting, a phase of life closing, the impulse to start something new can feel urgent. New goals, new plans, new distractions fill the space where uncertainty would otherwise expand. Desire also offers the illusion of time extension. If you are focused on future possibilities, you do not have to fully confront the passage of time. Planning becomes a shield against awareness of finitude. You tell yourself that the best parts are still ahead, postponing the need to process what has already passed. Loss, in particular, activates this mechanism. When something or someone leaves your life, the emptiness can feel overwhelming. Pursuing new experiences, connections, or possessions can soften the blow temporarily. It gives the impression that the void is being filled, even though grief remains beneath the surface. Avoiding grief through desire prevents integration. Grief is not only sadness, it is the process through which you adjust to a changed reality. When it is bypassed, unresolved emotions linger, resurfacing in unexpected ways: restlessness, irritability, numbness, or persistent dissatisfaction. Impermanence also challenges identity. If everything changes, who are you in the midst of that change? Desire provides a narrative of continuity. It tells you that you are still the person striving, building, becoming. Without it, identity may feel uncertain. This uncertainty can be interpreted as weakness rather than as openness. The mind prefers defined roles and predictable paths because they reduce ambiguity. Desire promises structure, a storyline that makes life feel coherent even when circumstances are unstable. Control is another element. Wanting something gives the impression that you can shape outcomes. Even if the outcome is uncertain, the act of wanting feels proactive. Accepting impermanence, on the other hand, involves acknowledging limits, recognizing that not everything can be directed. Buddhist teachings emphasize that suffering arises when reality is resisted. Impermanence is not a problem to solve, but a condition to understand. When you align with it rather than fight it, desire loses its compulsive edge. It becomes preference rather than necessity. Understanding impermanence also reveals the preciousness of experience. When you know that moments will not repeat exactly, attention sharpens. Ordinary interactions gain depth because they are recognized as fleeting. Gratitude arises not from possession, but from participation. Relationships transform under this awareness. Instead of clinging to people as if they could remain unchanged, you appreciate them as evolving beings. This reduces pressure and allows connection to breathe. Love becomes less about ownership and more about presence. Fear often diminishes as well. Much anxiety comes from trying to prevent inevitable change. When you accept that change is unavoidable, energy shifts from resistance to adaptation. You focus on how to respond rather than on how to stop the process. Desire then becomes more conscious. You may still pursue goals, but not as a way to escape reality. You pursue them because they align with values or curiosity, not because they promise permanent security. Letting go of the need for permanence also softens attachment to outcomes. Effort becomes meaningful regardless of results because the process itself is valued. This reduces the pressure to succeed as a means of proving stability. Mindfulness practices cultivate this perspective by anchoring awareness in the present moment. Each breath, each sensation, each thought is observed as it arises and fades. This direct experience of change trains the mind to accept impermanence not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality. Nature offers similar lessons. Seasons shift, weather fluctuates, landscapes evolve. Observing these patterns reminds you that transformation is not a personal failure. It is the rhythm of existence. Creativity often flourishes when impermanence is embraced. Without the need to preserve everything exactly as it is, you allow experimentation and renewal. You become less afraid of endings because you trust beginnings to follow. There is also a sense of liberation in recognizing that you do not have to hold everything together. Life continues even when plans dissolve. New forms emerge from disruption. This resilience is easier to perceive when you are not clinging to a fixed image of how things should remain. Desire as escape often masks a deeper longing, not for more things, but for reassurance that loss will not erase meaning. When you face impermanence directly, you discover that meaning is not dependent on permanence. It arises from engagement, compassion, and awareness. Spiritual traditions speak of this as freedom from attachment. Attachment is not love or appreciation. It is the demand that what you value must not change. Releasing that demand allows love to coexist with acceptance of transience. Grief becomes less frightening when it is understood as a natural response rather than as a threat. It reflects the depth of connection, not the failure to control. Allowing grief to move through you honors what was meaningful without denying what has changed. As you become more comfortable with impermanence, desire loses its role as a shield. It becomes one aspect of experience rather than a defense mechanism. You can want without being driven, pursue without being desperate. Peace grows from this alignment. You are no longer exhausted from trying to outrun reality. Energy returns because it is not spent on maintaining illusions of stability. You also develop patience with yourself and others. Recognizing that everyone is navigating change reduces harsh judgments. Compassion becomes easier because you see the shared vulnerability underlying human behavior. Life feels less like a race against time and more like a flow you are participating in. Urgency softens into attentiveness. Each moment becomes sufficient because it does not need to last forever to be meaningful. And as acceptance of impermanence deepens, another subtle pattern comes into view: the way the mind, accustomed to constant stimulation and motion, can find peace unfamiliar or even dull, preferring chaos because it feels alive compared to quiet stability. As acceptance of change begins to settle into your awareness, a surprising reaction can appear, not relief, but unease. Without constant struggle, without urgent desires pulling you forward, life can feel strangely flat. The calm you once wished for does not immediately feel comforting. Instead, it can feel unfamiliar, almost empty, as if something important is missing. This reaction reveals how deeply the mind has been shaped by stimulation and tension. An untrained mind becomes accustomed to intensity. Chaos, pressure, drama, and constant activity create a sense of aliveness because they flood the body with energy. When that energy subsides, the contrast can feel like loss rather than peace. Stillness does not excite the senses in the same way, so it is interpreted as dull. Restlessness is not simply impatience, it is a learned state. Over time, the nervous system adapts to high levels of stimulation. Fast-paced environments, endless information, emotional highs and lows, these conditions recalibrate what feels normal. When stimulation decreases, the system searches for it, just as a body accustomed to noise struggles in silence. Buddhist reflections describe this as the monkey mind, constantly jumping from thought to thought, sensation to sensation, unable to settle. The mind seeks novelty because novelty interrupts the discomfort of stillness. It would rather chase something new than remain with what is already present. Peace feels boring to an untrained mind because peace lacks urgency. There is nothing to fix, nothing to chase, nothing to prove. Without a target, the habitual machinery of striving has nowhere to direct itself. This absence can feel disorienting, like a vehicle still accelerating after the road has ended. Many people mistake restlessness for ambition or productivity. They believe constant movement is necessary to stay relevant or successful. Slowing down feels risky, as if it might lead to stagnation. This belief reinforces the cycle, keeping the mind in perpetual motion. Emotional turbulence can also become familiar. If life has included frequent stress or instability, calm may feel suspicious. You may anticipate that something will go wrong because chaos has conditioned your expectations. The absence of problems can feel temporary, like a calm before a storm. The body participates in this pattern. Stress hormones elevate alertness, sharpen focus, and create a sense of urgency. When these hormones decrease, energy levels shift. Without understanding this physiological change, you may interpret it as lack of motivation rather than as recovery. Restlessness also arises from unresolved thoughts. When the mind finally slows, unfinished concerns surface. Tasks postponed, decisions avoided, conversations left incomplete, all demand attention. Instead of addressing them directly, the mind may seek distraction to push them back down. Technology intensifies restlessness by providing constant stimulation. Quick rewards, endless content, immediate feedback. These features train the brain to expect rapid change. Slow experiences struggle to compete, making ordinary life feel muted. Attention becomes fragmented under these conditions. Focusing on a single activity for an extended period feels difficult because the brain expects novelty. Multitasking becomes habitual even when unnecessary, preventing deep engagement. Boredom, often feared, is actually a gateway to creativity and insight. When external input decreases, the mind begins to generate its own material. Ideas emerge, memories resurface, connections form. Avoiding boredom deprives you of this natural process. Training the mind involves gradually increasing tolerance for stillness. Short periods of quiet reflection, mindful breathing, or focused activity rebuild the capacity to remain present without stimulation. At first, discomfort may intensify because the contrast is stark. Patience is essential because conditioning does not dissolve instantly. The mind may resist by creating new worries, fantasies, or impulses. Observing these reactions without judgment weakens their hold. Physical practices such as slow walking, stretching, or mindful movement help regulate energy levels. They provide gentle stimulation without overwhelming the senses, easing the transition from chaos to calm. Nature offers a supportive environment for retraining attention. Natural settings engage the senses softly. The sound of wind, the movement of water, the patterns of light. These stimuli are rich, yet not intrusive, encouraging relaxation without dullness. As sensitivity returns, you begin to notice subtler forms of pleasure. The taste of food becomes more vivid, conversations more nuanced, ordinary tasks more satisfying. Peace reveals its texture, no longer mistaken for emptiness. Emotional stability grows from this awareness. Without constant highs and lows, feelings become easier to navigate. You respond rather than react because you are not overstimulated. Relationships improve when restlessness decreases. You can be present without needing entertainment or distraction. Silence shared with another person becomes comfortable rather than awkward. Productivity also changes. Instead of frantic activity, you work with sustained focus. Quality replaces quantity because attention is not scattered. The fear of missing out diminishes as you appreciate depth over variety. You realize that meaningful experiences do not require constant novelty. Repetition can be enriching when approached with awareness. Restlessness often masks fear of confronting deeper questions: purpose, mortality, meaning. When activity slows, these questions surface. Facing them can lead to clarity, but avoidance keeps the mind circling the surface. Buddhist teachings encourage seeing restlessness as a signal rather than as an enemy. It indicates areas where attention is fragmented or where unresolved issues persist. Listening to it reveals what requires care. Compassion toward yourself is crucial. Judging restlessness as failure only adds tension. Recognizing it as a conditioned response allows gentleness and curiosity. Over time, calm becomes familiar. The body learns that safety does not require constant alertness. The mind discovers that peace contains richness not immediately obvious. Joy emerges in quieter forms: contentment, appreciation, connection. These forms are less dramatic but more sustainable. They do not depend on external conditions. You also develop resilience to stress. Because calm is accessible, disturbances do not destabilize you as easily. You recover more quickly because your baseline is stable. The perception of time shifts as well. Without constant urgency, moments feel fuller. You are not rushing through life to reach the next milestone. You are inhabiting it. Training the mind does not eliminate desire or ambition. It aligns them with awareness. You pursue goals without sacrificing peace, because peace is no longer seen as incompatible with action. This transformation reveals that chaos was never necessary to feel alive. Aliveness comes from presence, not from intensity. The mind learns to rest without losing vitality. And as restlessness softens into steadiness, another subtle tendency becomes visible: the way even spiritual growth and self-improvement can become new objects of craving, pursued with the same urgency that once fueled material desires. As the mind becomes calmer and less driven by chaos, a new temptation can quietly appear. The desire to secure this calm, to hold on to it, to turn peace itself into something to achieve and possess. What once was a release from striving can slowly become another form of striving. The search for freedom transforms into a new kind of pressure, subtle but persistent, because now the goal is not material success, but inner perfection. There is a paradox hidden in the path of growth. The very tools meant to free you from craving can become objects of craving themselves. Meditation becomes a performance. Wisdom becomes a status symbol. Detachment becomes something to display rather than something to live. Without noticing, the mind replaces one set of desires with another that appears more refined. Spiritual materialism is the tendency to treat personal development, healing, or enlightenment as acquisitions. Instead of collecting possessions, you collect experiences, insights, practices, and identities that signal progress. These collections may not occupy physical space, but they occupy psychological space just as strongly. Buddhist reflections warn that the ego is adaptable. It can use any narrative to reinforce itself, even the narrative of transcendence. You may begin with a sincere wish to understand suffering, but gradually the desire to be seen as wise, calm, or awakened can take over. The identity of the seeker becomes as rigid as the identities you tried to move beyond. This shift often happens subtly. You may start comparing your level of awareness with others, measuring who is more mindful, more disciplined, more detached. The same patterns of comparison that once applied to success or possessions now apply to spirituality. Practices meant to cultivate humility can become sources of pride. You might feel superior for your discipline, your knowledge, your restraint. This pride is difficult to detect because it hides behind virtuous language, yet it creates distance from others and from your own authentic experience. Another form of spiritual materialism is the pursuit of extraordinary states. Moments of deep peace, clarity, or insight can feel transformative, and the mind naturally wants to repeat them. Chasing these states can lead to disappointment because they are not permanent. When they fade, you may feel as though something is wrong, even though fluctuation is natural. This pursuit can also detach you from ordinary life. You may begin to see daily responsibilities as obstacles to growth rather than as part of it. Relationships, work, and mundane tasks can feel less meaningful compared to peak experiences, creating imbalance. Buddhist teachings emphasize integration rather than escape. The purpose of practice is not to live in a separate realm of calm, but to bring awareness into every aspect of life. Enlightenment is not a destination to reach, but a way of relating to experience. Spiritual materialism often involves accumulating information without transformation. Reading, listening, attending workshops, these activities can create the illusion of progress. Knowledge becomes a substitute for practice, providing comfort without requiring change. The mind enjoys this because it maintains control. Genuine transformation involves uncertainty, vulnerability, and letting go of familiar patterns. Intellectual understanding alone does not threaten the ego in the same way. Another sign of this tendency is constant searching for the perfect method. You move from one practice to another, believing that the next one will finally deliver lasting peace. This movement mirrors the earlier pattern of seeking satisfaction through external means. Patience becomes difficult because progress is measured by intensity rather than by depth. Quiet, gradual shifts may be overlooked because they do not feel dramatic. The desire for visible results interferes with subtle growth. Spiritual identities can also become restrictive. Labels such as mindful, awakened, disciplined, or detached create expectations that you may feel pressured to maintain. When emotions or struggles arise, you may suppress them to preserve the image, preventing authentic processing. Authenticity requires acknowledging imperfection. Growth does not eliminate human vulnerability. It changes your relationship with it. Pretending to be beyond difficulty creates internal conflict because it denies reality. Buddhist reflections encourage humility as an antidote. Humility recognizes that understanding is always partial, that learning continues, that no state of mind is permanent. This perspective keeps the path open rather than rigid. Compassion is equally important. When you stop judging yourself for not being perfectly calm or wise, you create space for genuine insight. Compassion also extends to others, reducing the urge to measure or compare. Letting go of spiritual ambition does not mean abandoning growth. It means shifting motivation from self-image to sincere curiosity. You practice not to become special, but to understand experience more clearly. Daily life becomes the primary field of practice. Ordinary interactions, frustrations, and joys provide opportunities to observe the mind in action. Growth happens through engagement rather than through withdrawal. There is also a recognition that awakening is not something you own. It is not a possession that can be secured. It is a moment-to-moment openness to reality as it unfolds. Trying to hold onto it converts it into another object of desire. Gratitude deepens when you stop chasing extraordinary experiences. Simple awareness of breathing, walking, listening becomes meaningful because it is no longer overshadowed by expectations. Humor can help dissolve spiritual seriousness. Taking the path too rigidly can create tension. Laughing at your own tendencies brings lightness and perspective, reminding you that growth does not require solemnity. Community plays a role as well. Honest conversations with others on similar paths can expose blind spots and prevent isolation. When experiences are shared openly, the illusion of specialness fades. Service shifts attention outward. Helping others without seeking recognition counters the tendency to turn growth into self-centered pursuit. It grounds insight in compassion. Rest becomes part of the journey. Constant striving, even for noble goals, can lead to exhaustion. Allowing periods of integration prevents burnout and preserves clarity. Awareness of motivation becomes crucial. Before engaging in any practice, you can ask whether the intention is to escape discomfort, to gain approval, or to understand. This question reveals subtle forms of craving. Over time, the distinction between spiritual life and ordinary life dissolves. Washing dishes, answering messages, caring for others. These actions become expressions of mindfulness when performed with attention. The need to appear evolved diminishes. You allow yourself to be human, to experience confusion, joy, frustration, tenderness, without labeling them as progress or regression. Peace becomes quieter and more stable because it is not dependent on maintaining an identity. It flows through experience rather than standing apart from it. You also become more tolerant of uncertainty. Instead of seeking definitive answers, you remain open to unfolding understanding. This openness reduces anxiety about whether you are doing things correctly. The path transforms from a ladder to climb into a landscape to explore. There is no final point to secure, only continuous discovery. Each moment offers a chance to see more clearly. And as the urge to perfect yourself softens, another pattern becomes visible. The constant drive to become someone different, someone improved, as if your current existence were insufficient on its own. As the pressure to perfect yourself begins to fade, another habit steps into view, the quiet refusal to accept where you are right now. Even without chasing possessions or spiritual status, the mind can still whisper that this version of you is temporary, incomplete, not yet worthy of rest. It promises that peace will come later when you finally become someone else. There is a restless energy behind the need to become. It feels productive, hopeful, forward-moving, yet it carries a hidden message. Who you are in this moment is not enough. This message can be so familiar that it no longer sounds harsh. It sounds like ambition, discipline, responsibility, but beneath it is a deep discomfort with simply existing without improvement. The addiction to becoming begins with comparison and expectation, but it survives even after those influences weaken. It becomes a self-sustaining cycle. You set a standard, move toward it, reach it, and immediately set another. Each step forward creates a new distance to close. Buddhist reflections describe this as a refusal to inhabit the present. The mind lives in a future version of life, constantly rehearsing what must change. The present becomes a waiting room rather than a place of living. You are always preparing to arrive somewhere else. Preparation replaces participation. You may tell yourself that constant improvement is necessary to avoid stagnation. Growth is valuable, but when it is driven by rejection of the present self, it becomes exhausting. You are not growing out of curiosity or love. You are growing out of discomfort with being as you are. This discomfort can originate from early experiences where approval depended on performance. If acceptance was conditional, you learned to equate worth with progress. Rest felt dangerous because it risked losing validation. Even as an adult, the pattern persists internally. The mind becomes a taskmaster, issuing instructions for continuous refinement. Improve your skills, refine your personality, optimize your habits, upgrade your life. Each suggestion seems reasonable on its own, but together they create a sense that completion is always out of reach. Identity becomes fluid in an unhealthy way. Instead of discovering who you are, you constantly replace yourself with a projected version. You may feel unsure which parts of your personality are authentic and which are constructed for approval or success. Relationships can become strained when you are never fully present. Others may sense that you are evaluating yourself during interactions, wondering how to improve rather than connecting naturally. This self-monitoring creates distance. The addiction to becoming also interferes with gratitude. Appreciation requires acknowledging the sufficiency of the present. When attention is fixed on future improvements, current blessings feel provisional. You tell yourself they will matter later, after you become better. Restlessness increases because the finish line keeps moving. Even achievements that once seemed significant lose their emotional impact quickly. Satisfaction fades as soon as the next goal appears. There is also a subtle fear of stopping. If you pause, you may feel empty, uncertain, or exposed. Movement provides distraction from these feelings. Without it, you must face the possibility that identity was built around striving rather than around being. Buddhist teachings encourage recognizing the difference between growth and escape. Growth arises from curiosity and compassion, while escape arises from dissatisfaction and fear. When you examine your motivation, you may discover how often the urge to become was an attempt to outrun discomfort. Presence offers an alternative. Presence does not deny the value of improvement. It balances it with acceptance. You work toward change while honoring the reality of where you stand. This balance reduces internal conflict. Acceptance is often misunderstood as passivity. In truth, it is clarity. When you accept your current state, you see it accurately without distortion from shame or denial. This clarity allows effective action because it is grounded in reality rather than in fantasy. Self-compassion becomes essential. Instead of treating yourself as a project to fix, you treat yourself as a person to understand. Compassion softens the harsh inner voice that insists you must become someone else to be worthy. Mindfulness practices help anchor attention in the present moment. When you observe sensations, thoughts, and emotions as they arise, you experience life directly rather than through the lens of improvement. This direct experience reveals that the present is not empty, it is full of subtle detail. Creative expression can also shift focus from becoming to being. Creating something for its own sake, without measuring its value, reconnects you with intrinsic motivation. The process matters more than the outcome. Nature provides another reminder. Trees do not rush to grow. They respond to conditions. Seasons unfold without urgency. Observing these patterns helps recalibrate your sense of time and progress. Relationships deepen when you allow yourself to be seen as you are, rather than as you hope to be. Vulnerability invites connection because it signals authenticity. Others feel less pressure to perform as well. Letting go of constant becoming does not eliminate aspiration, it refines it. Goals become expressions of interest rather than proofs of worth. Failure becomes information rather than condemnation. You also discover that identity is not a fixed destination. It is a process shaped by experience, reflection, and choice. Trying to finalize it prematurely creates tension. Allowing it to evolve naturally reduces pressure. Peace emerges when you stop negotiating with yourself about when you will be allowed to feel okay. Instead of postponing acceptance, you extend it to the present moment. This does not freeze you in place, it stabilizes you. From stability, action becomes more effective because it is not driven by panic. Decisions are guided by values rather than by insecurity. You respond to opportunities instead of chasing validation. Joy returns in quieter forms. Activities that once felt ordinary regain meaning because they are not overshadowed by self-criticism. You experience them directly rather than as steps towards something else. Time feels different when you are not racing against your own expectations. Moments stretch because they are inhabited fully. You are not measuring them against future possibilities. There is also relief in realizing that you do not need to reinvent yourself constantly. You can refine, adapt, learn without discarding who you have been. Continuity becomes comforting rather than limiting. Buddhist reflections emphasize that enlightenment is not becoming a different person, but seeing clearly who you already are beneath the layers of conditioning. This clarity dissolves the urgency to transform into an idealized self. The present becomes sufficient, not because it is perfect, but because it is real. You engage with it as it is, rather than as a stepping stone to somewhere else. And as the compulsion to become relaxes into acceptance, another realization surfaces. That even when you achieve what you once believed would complete you, a subtle emptiness can remain, revealing that success alone cannot provide inner fulfillment. As the urge to constantly reinvent yourself begins to settle, a quiet question can surface. If becoming someone else was never the answer, why did achieving so much still fail to bring lasting peace? There is a moment when the noise of striving fades and you are left alone with what you worked so hard to obtain, only to discover that the feeling you expected is not there. The success is real, the recognition is real, yet something inside remains untouched. There is a particular kind of emptiness that does not come from failure, but from accomplishment. It appears after goals are reached, after milestones are celebrated, after the effort finally pays off. Instead of relief, there is silence. Instead of fulfillment, there is a subtle question. Was this all it was supposed to be? Achievement creates a powerful narrative. It promises closure, validation, and resolution. You believe that once you arrive, uncertainty will disappear, but arrival often reveals that the inner landscape has not changed as much as expected. External circumstances shifted, but the mind remains restless. Buddhist reflections explain that success cannot resolve inner confusion because it operates on a different level. Achievement addresses conditions outside the self: status, resources, recognition. Inner clarity requires understanding the nature of desire, identity, and suffering. Without that understanding, success becomes another environment in which the same patterns continue. The emptiness behind achievement often surprises people because it contradicts cultural messages. Society teaches that success equals happiness, that hard work guarantees fulfillment. When this equation fails, individuals may feel ashamed or ungrateful, believing something is wrong with them. This shame can lead to deeper isolation. You may hesitate to express dissatisfaction because others assume you should be satisfied. Gratitude becomes performative rather than genuine, masking confusion rather than resolving it. One reason success feels hollow is that it does not address emotional needs formed earlier in life. Recognition cannot replace belonging, wealth cannot replace love, status cannot replace self-acceptance. These needs operate independently of accomplishment. Achievement can also create new pressures. Once you reach a certain level, expectations increase. You must maintain performance, protect reputation, justify your position. The fear of losing what you gained can overshadow the joy of having it. Identity may become entangled with success. You define yourself by your role or accomplishments, making it difficult to separate who you are from what you do. When challenges arise, they feel like threats to existence rather than as normal fluctuations. Relationships can shift under the weight of success. Some connections become transactional, influenced by status or opportunity. Authentic interaction becomes harder to find because people respond to your achievements rather than to your humanity. There is also a loss of innocence. Before success, possibilities feel open and undefined. After success, paths narrow because you are expected to continue in the same direction. Freedom decreases as responsibility increases. Buddhist teachings emphasize that fulfillment comes from clarity about the nature of experience, not from manipulating external conditions. Clarity involves seeing thoughts, emotions, and desires without identifying with them completely. It reveals that peace is not produced by events, but by awareness. When inner clarity is absent, success amplifies confusion rather than resolving it. You have more resources to pursue distractions, more opportunities to reinforce patterns, more pressure to sustain an image. Without grounding, expansion can feel destabilizing. Another factor is adaptation. Humans adjust quickly to improved circumstances. What once felt extraordinary becomes normal. This adaptation protects against complacency, but also reduces the emotional impact of achievement. Satisfaction fades as novelty diminishes. Pleasure derived from success is often tied to comparison. Being ahead, recognized, admired produces a temporary high, but comparison is unstable because it depends on others' positions. When someone surpasses you, the high dissolves. Meaning differs from pleasure. Pleasure is immediate and sensory, while meaning is enduring and contextual. Success may provide pleasure but not meaning unless it aligns with values and contributes to something beyond personal gain. Service often restores meaning because it shifts attention outward. Using resources or influence to support others reconnects achievement with purpose. Without this connection, success can feel self-referential and empty. Inner clarity also involves confronting vulnerability. Success can create an illusion of invulnerability, discouraging introspection. Acknowledging uncertainty and limitation reopens the path to growth and authenticity. Silence becomes valuable here. Time away from performance allows reflection on what truly matters. You can examine motivations, reassess priorities, and reconnect with parts of yourself that were neglected during striving. Creative expression can also reintroduce vitality. Engaging in activities that are not tied to success metrics, art, writing, exploration, allows you to experience flow without pressure. Creativity reconnects you with intrinsic motivation. Mindfulness practices reveal the transient nature of both achievement and emptiness. Observing sensations and thoughts shows that dissatisfaction is not permanent. It arises and passes like any other experience. Gratitude deepens when you appreciate success as part of life rather than as its defining feature. You acknowledge what it provides while recognizing its limits. This balanced view prevents both attachment and rejection. Relationships grounded in authenticity become more important than those based on status. Sharing vulnerability with trusted individuals counters isolation and reminds you that connection does not depend on achievement. Rest becomes essential as well. Continuous striving depletes energy, making it difficult to experience satisfaction. Allowing recovery supports clarity and emotional balance. Buddhist reflections often point to the middle path, avoiding extremes of indulgence and denial. Applying this to success means neither idolizing nor dismissing it. You engage with achievements while maintaining perspective. Letting go of the belief that success must complete you reduces pressure. You can appreciate accomplishments without expecting them to solve existential questions. Fulfillment becomes a practice rather than a destination. Self-inquiry helps uncover what you truly seek. Beneath goals may lie desires for safety, belonging, respect, or freedom. Addressing these needs directly is more effective than hoping success will satisfy them indirectly. Time spent in nature can recalibrate priorities. Natural environments operate independently of human hierarchies, reminding you that worth is not measured by titles or possessions. Physical well-being also influences perception. Exhaustion can amplify emptiness, while balance supports resilience. Caring for the body is part of cultivating clarity. Spiritual exploration may shift from seeking peak experiences to understanding ordinary awareness. Insight arises not only in dramatic moments, but in sustained attention to everyday life. As clarity develops, success becomes integrated rather than dominant. It occupies its place without overshadowing other dimensions of existence. You can enjoy it without being defined by it. Peace begins to emerge from alignment rather than from accumulation. When actions reflect values, satisfaction grows naturally. The need for external validation decreases. You may also discover that emptiness itself carries information. It signals that something essential has been overlooked: connection, authenticity, purpose. Listening to it guides adjustment rather than avoidance. Forgiveness plays a role in releasing attachment to expectations. Forgiving yourself for believing that success would solve everything allows you to move forward without resentment. Presence becomes the anchor that stabilizes experience. Instead of living in anticipation or reflection, you engage with what is unfolding. This engagement restores vitality, and as the hollowness behind achievement transforms into understanding, another pattern becomes visible. The way repeated indulgence in pleasure can dull sensitivity, making joy harder to feel even when circumstances are favorable. As the hollow feeling behind achievement begins to transform into understanding, another quiet shift becomes noticeable. The strange way joy itself seems harder to access, even when life offers comfort, success, and opportunity. It is not that pleasure is absent. It is everywhere, available at any moment. Yet something inside feels less responsive, as if the senses have grown tired of receiving too much for too long. There is a hidden cost to constant indulgence. When stimulation is always within reach, the nervous system adapts by lowering sensitivity. What once felt exciting becomes ordinary. What once satisfied now barely registers. The search for enjoyment intensifies, not because life has less to offer, but because the ability to feel has been dulled. Pleasure fatigue emerges when the brain is repeatedly exposed to high levels of reward. Each experience releases chemicals that signal enjoyment and motivation. Over time, the brain reduces its response to maintain balance. This adaptation protects against overload, but it also reduces the impact of future pleasures. Buddhist reflections describe this as the diminishing return of craving. Desire promises satisfaction, but repeated fulfillment weakens the very capacity it seeks to nourish. The more you pursue intense experiences, the less satisfying they become, leading to a cycle of escalation. Modern life accelerates this process. Instant access to entertainment, food, social interaction, and information creates an environment of continuous stimulation. There is little time for anticipation or recovery. Without contrast, pleasure loses depth. Anticipation plays a crucial role in enjoyment. Waiting allows imagination to build expectation, amplifying the eventual experience. When gratification is immediate, this build-up disappears. Experiences blur together, leaving a vague sense of emptiness. Pleasure fatigue also affects motivation. When rewards are constant, effort feels unnecessary. Without effort, achievements lack meaning because they were not earned through challenge. The absence of struggle reduces appreciation. Relationships can suffer as well. Constant exposure to idealized interactions through media may dull satisfaction with ordinary human connection. Real conversations, with their pauses and imperfections, can feel less stimulating compared to curated exchanges. Food offers a clear example. Highly processed flavors overwhelm natural taste perception. Simple meals that once felt nourishing may seem bland in comparison. Returning to balance requires retraining the palate, allowing sensitivity to recover. Sleep can be affected too. Stimulation late into the night disrupts natural rhythms, reducing restorative rest. Fatigue then increases reliance on quick pleasures to compensate, reinforcing the cycle. Pleasure fatigue often coexists with emotional numbness. When sensitivity decreases, not only joy but also subtle feelings become harder to detect. Life feels flatter, less vibrant, even if objectively comfortable. Buddhist teachings encourage moderation as a path to restoring balance. Limiting excessive indulgence allows the nervous system to recalibrate. Simple experiences regain intensity because they are no longer overshadowed by extremes. Mindfulness enhances this process by slowing perception. When you eat, listen or observe with full attention, details become vivid again. Quantity becomes less important than quality of awareness. Periods of intentional restraint can be transformative. Choosing to step back from constant stimulation reveals how dependent the mind became. Discomfort may arise initially, but it signals the beginning of recovery. Nature offers a gentle reintroduction to balanced pleasure. Natural environments stimulate the senses without overwhelming them. The sound of water, the texture of air, the rhythm of movement provide subtle satisfaction that rebuilds sensitivity. Physical activity also helps reset the system. Movement releases tension and improves mood without relying on artificial rewards. Effort followed by rest creates a healthy cycle of stimulation and recovery. Creative pursuits restore intrinsic motivation. Creating something from nothing engages attention deeply, producing satisfaction independent of external rewards. The process itself becomes fulfilling. Social connection grounded in authenticity counters superficial stimulation. Genuine interaction involves presence, empathy, and unpredictability, offering depth that cannot be replicated by quick exchanges. Gratitude practices shift focus from intensity to appreciation. Recognizing small pleasures, warmth, comfort, companionship, strengthens the ability to feel contentment without escalation. Pleasure fatigue reveals how joy is linked to contrast. Without periods of quiet, rest, or simplicity, intensity loses meaning. Darkness makes light visible. Silence makes sound rich. Reintroducing boredom can be beneficial. When the mind is not constantly entertained, curiosity awakens. You begin to notice details previously overlooked, rediscovering interest in ordinary experiences. Emotional awareness deepens as sensitivity returns. You can distinguish between genuine satisfaction and temporary distraction. This clarity supports wiser choices about how to spend time and energy. Boundaries become important. Limiting exposure to overstimulating environments protects balance. You learn to choose experiences that nourish rather than exhaust. Buddhist reflections emphasize that joy arises from alignment rather than from accumulation. When actions match values and awareness is present, satisfaction emerges naturally. It does not require constant novelty. Patience is essential because recovery is gradual. The brain and body need time to adjust. Initial restlessness does not mean failure. It reflects the fading of old patterns. Over time, the range of emotional experience expands. You can feel both subtle pleasure and deeper contentment. life regains texture because sensitivity has been restored. This renewed sensitivity also enhances resilience. Challenges feel manageable because they are not layered with chronic numbness. You respond with clarity rather than with desperation for relief. Relationships deepen when you are no longer seeking constant excitement. Quiet companionship becomes meaningful. Shared silence feels comfortable rather than empty. Work becomes more satisfying as well. Focus replaces scattered attention, allowing immersion in tasks. Completion feels rewarding because it is experienced fully. Spiritual practice benefits from reduced stimulation. Meditation becomes easier because the mind is less agitated. Insight arises from calm observation rather than from forced concentration. You begin to see that joy is not a scarce resource to chase, but a capacity to cultivate. Protecting this capacity requires balance, awareness, and restraint. Pleasure, when approached with mindfulness, becomes a doorway to appreciation rather than an escape from discomfort. It enriches life without dominating it. As the ability to feel returns, gratitude grows naturally. You recognize how much was available all along, hidden beneath layers of overstimulation. And as pleasure fatigue gives way to renewed sensitivity, another subtle realization emerges: the persistent desire for certainty and control in a world that continues to change, regardless of how carefully you plan. As sensitivity returns and life begins to feel vivid again, another tension becomes impossible to ignore: the quiet fear that all this clarity can still be taken away by forces outside your control. No matter how balanced or aware you become, uncertainty remains. Plans can collapse, people can change, health can shift, time can rearrange everything without warning. The mind, sensing this instability, searches desperately for something solid to hold on to. There is a deep human longing for certainty. It promises safety, predictability, relief from anxiety. If everything could be controlled, nothing would threaten peace. Yet the world moves according to conditions far beyond individual influence. Weather changes, economies fluctuate, relationships evolve, bodies age. Control appears possible in small areas but dissolves when tested by larger forces. The myth of personal control begins as a survival strategy. Early experiences teach that planning, discipline, and caution can prevent harm. These skills are useful, but they can expand into an illusion that enough preparation will eliminate uncertainty entirely. When reality contradicts this belief, frustration and fear intensify. Buddhist reflections describe existence as inherently unstable. Impermanence is not a problem to solve, but a condition to understand. Everything that arises will pass, not because of failure, but because change is fundamental to life. Resisting this truth creates suffering because resistance cannot stop transformation. The desire for control often masks vulnerability. Admitting that outcomes cannot be guaranteed feels threatening because it exposes dependence on factors beyond the self. Control becomes a shield against the discomfort of unpredictability. This shield can manifest as overplanning. You analyze every possibility, rehearse conversations, anticipate problems before they occur. Preparation has value, but excessive planning consumes energy without increasing actual security. It creates the illusion of mastery while amplifying anxiety. Perfectionism is another expression. If everything is done flawlessly, nothing will go wrong. This belief ignores the role of chance and external influence. Even perfect execution cannot prevent unexpected events. Relationships highlight the limits of control. You can influence behavior through kindness or communication, but you cannot determine another person's thoughts or choices. Attempting to do so often leads to tension and disappointment. Health offers another example. Lifestyle choices support well-being, yet illness can still occur. Recognizing this uncertainty encourages compassion rather than blame, both for yourself and for others. The illusion of control is reinforced by selective memory. When plans succeed, you attribute the outcome to skill. When they fail, you attribute it to bad luck. This bias maintains the belief that control is stronger than it actually is. Modern culture amplifies this illusion by celebrating mastery and independence. Messages emphasize personal responsibility to such an extent that systemic and random factors are overlooked. Failure becomes personalized, even when circumstances played a significant role. Technology intensifies expectations of control. Instant access to information and services creates the impression that everything should be manageable. When delays or disruptions occur, frustration feels disproportionate because patience has diminished. Buddhist teaching suggests shifting focus from control to influence. Influence acknowledges effort while accepting uncertainty. You act with intention but release attachment to specific outcomes. This approach preserves motivation without creating rigidity. Acceptance is often misunderstood as resignation. In reality, it is a recognition of boundaries. You distinguish between what can be shaped and what must be faced. This clarity prevents wasted energy on impossible tasks. Mindfulness supports this distinction by grounding attention in present conditions rather than in imagined futures. You respond to what is happening instead of to what might happen. This responsiveness is more effective than rigid planning. Trust develops gradually when you experience surviving uncertainty. Each challenge navigated without total control reinforces resilience. You learn that stability comes from adaptability rather than from prediction. Flexibility becomes a core skill. Instead of clinging to one path, you remain open to adjustment. This openness reduces fear because change is no longer perceived as catastrophe, but as part of the process. Letting go of control also deepens relationships. When you stop trying to manage others' reactions, you allow authentic interaction. Vulnerability invites connection because it acknowledges shared uncertainty. Creativity thrives in uncertainty as well. New ideas often emerge when outcomes are not predetermined. Exploration replaces execution, expanding possibilities rather than narrowing them. Gratitude shifts perspective from scarcity to appreciation. Instead of focusing on what could go wrong, you notice what is already working. This awareness balances caution with optimism. Buddhist reflections emphasize equanimity, the ability to remain steady amid change. Equanimity does not eliminate emotion. It prevents emotion from dictating behavior. You feel deeply while remaining grounded. Practices such as breathing awareness anchor the mind when anxiety rises. Returning to physical sensation interrupts spirals of hypothetical thinking. The present moment becomes a refuge from imagined scenarios. Community provides support when control fails. Sharing experiences of uncertainty reduces isolation and reminds you that unpredictability is universal. Collective resilience strengthens individual resilience. Meaning can be found in responding to events rather than in controlling them. How you interpret and integrate experiences shapes growth more than the events themselves. Forgiveness plays a role in releasing the need for control. You forgive yourself for mistakes made while trying to manage the uncontrollable. You forgive others for actions influenced by their own limitations. Time reveals that many feared outcomes were survivable. Memory softens the intensity of past uncertainty, demonstrating that adaptation occurred even without perfect preparation. Spiritual perspectives often frame uncertainty as space for transformation. Without fixed outcomes, new possibilities can arise. Control would limit evolution by freezing conditions. You begin to see that certainty is not required for peace. Peace emerges from confidence in your capacity to navigate whatever arises. This confidence is dynamic rather than static. The myth of personal control dissolves gradually, replaced by a partnership with reality. You engage actively while respecting limits. Effort becomes collaborative rather than confrontational. Joy becomes less dependent on stability because you no longer expect permanence. You appreciate experiences without needing them to last forever. This appreciation reduces fear of loss. Presence deepens as attention shifts from managing the future to experiencing the present. Moments feel richer because they are not overshadowed by contingency planning. Resilience grows through exposure to manageable uncertainty. Each adaptation builds trust in your ability to cope. Fear decreases because uncertainty is no longer unfamiliar. Buddhist teachings describe liberation as freedom from attachment to outcomes. When you release the demand for certainty, suffering decreases because disappointment has less to attach to. You still set goals and make plans, but with lighter attachment. Success is welcomed, failure is integrated, both are seen as transient. Identity remains stable because it is not tied to results. Compassion for others increases when you recognize that everyone navigates unpredictability. Judgment softens because control is understood as limited. Humility replaces arrogance. You acknowledge the role of chance, support, and timing in achievements. Gratitude replaces entitlement. As acceptance of uncertainty settles into wisdom, another subtle habit becomes visible. The tendency to cling not only to control, but also to the familiar patterns of thinking that created suffering in the first place, even when freedom is possible. As the illusion of control begins to loosen, a deeper discomfort can rise from beneath it. The unsettling possibility that even if life could be managed perfectly, it might still feel empty without a clear sense of meaning. When certainty fades, silence follows. And in that silence, the mind confronts questions it has been avoiding for years. Questions about purpose, about direction, about whether all the striving was pointing anywhere at all. There is a reason desire feels urgent. It keeps the mind occupied, moving, chasing, planning. As long as there is something to want, there is no need to sit with the unsettling thought that nothing external can fully answer the question of why you are here. Desire becomes a distraction from existential uncertainty. The fear of meaninglessness is rarely spoken aloud, yet it shapes behavior quietly. It appears in the constant search for goals, achievements, experiences, relationships, possessions. Each new pursuit promises significance, a sense that life is moving towards something important. Without these pursuits, stillness might reveal a frightening absence of direction. Buddhist reflections describe this as a fundamental misunderstanding. Meaning is not something hidden outside waiting to be discovered through accumulation. It emerges from awareness, compassion, and engagement with reality. When life is lived unconsciously, even extraordinary circumstances feel hollow because they are not truly experienced. Desire fills time so that reflection never has space to unfold. If every moment is occupied with planning the next acquisition or improvement, there is no opportunity to ask deeper questions. Activity replaces inquiry. This pattern often begins early. Children learn that approval comes from achievement, that busyness signals value. As adults, idleness can feel uncomfortable because it challenges the belief that worth depends on productivity. Silence becomes threatening because it removes distractions. Without noise, thoughts about mortality, purpose, and identity surface. Desire offers a quick escape by redirecting attention outward. Consumer culture amplifies this dynamic by presenting endless options for fulfillment. Advertising suggests that happiness and meaning can be purchased, upgraded, customized. The promise is seductive because it simplifies complex emotional needs into tangible solutions. Yet satisfaction fades quickly, revealing that the underlying questions remain unanswered. The cycle repeats with new objects, new goals, new experiences, each providing temporary relief. Social comparison intensifies fear of meaninglessness. Observing others' achievements creates pressure to prove that your life matters too. Instead of exploring what feels authentic, you pursue what appears impressive. Buddhist teachings encourage turning toward discomfort rather than away from it. Facing existential questions directly allows insight to develop. Meaning is not found through avoidance, but through honest engagement. Meditation is one method of encountering these questions without panic. Sitting quietly reveals the mind's tendency to generate desires whenever stillness appears. Observing this process reduces its power. Meaning often arises from connection rather than from accomplishment. Relationships grounded in empathy and presence provide a sense of belonging that external success cannot replicate. Service also contributes to meaning by shifting focus from self-centered concerns to shared humanity. Helping others creates purpose because it aligns action with compassion. Creative expression offers another path. Creating something meaningful, even on a small scale, affirms the ability to shape experience rather than merely consume it. Art, writing, building, teaching, these acts generate significance through participation. Nature can evoke a sense of perspective. Observing vast landscapes or intricate ecosystems reminds you that life extends beyond individual narratives. This awareness can be humbling, but also comforting. Gratitude transforms perception by highlighting what already exists rather than what is missing. Appreciating simple experiences counters the belief that meaning must be grand or dramatic. Buddhist reflections emphasize impermanence as a source of meaning rather than as a threat. Because everything changes, each moment becomes precious. Awareness of transience intensifies appreciation. Identity plays a role as well. When identity is tied to roles or achievements, losing them threatens meaning. Developing a sense of self grounded in values rather than in positions provides stability. Values act as internal guides. They shape decisions independent of external validation. Living according to values creates coherence between intention and action, which fosters meaning. Existential fear often decreases when you recognize that uncertainty is universal. Everyone navigates life without complete answers. Shared vulnerability can be a source of connection rather than isolation. Humor helps lighten the weight of existential concerns. Laughing at the absurdity of trying to control or define everything introduces flexibility into rigid thinking. Spiritual perspectives may offer frameworks for understanding purpose beyond individual experience. Whether through religious belief or philosophical inquiry, these perspectives provide context. Presence is perhaps the most direct antidote to fear of meaninglessness. When attention is fully engaged with what is happening now, life feels vivid and significant without needing justification. Moments of simple awareness, breathing, listening, walking, reveal that existence itself has texture and depth. Meaning is not an abstract concept, but a lived experience. The pursuit of legacy can also distract from present meaning. Focusing on how you will be remembered shifts attention away from how you are living now. Impact grows naturally from authentic engagement rather than from calculated attempts at immortality. Forgiveness releases energy trapped in past narratives, freeing attention for current experience. Letting go of resentment opens space for new meaning to emerge. Community provides a sense of shared journey. Participating in collective activities reinforces belonging and reduces the burden of defining purpose alone. Learning for its own sake cultivates curiosity, which generates meaning through exploration. Knowledge becomes a tool for understanding rather than for status. Physical movement reconnects you with the body, grounding abstract concerns in tangible sensation. Walking, stretching, breathing bring awareness back to immediate reality. Rituals can anchor meaning in daily life. Simple practices performed with intention create continuity and structure, reinforcing the sense that life is unfolding purposefully. Buddhist teachings highlight compassion for oneself as essential. Harsh self-criticism deepens existential anxiety, while kindness fosters resilience. Over time, you may discover that meaning is not a single answer, but an evolving relationship with experience. It grows as understanding deepens and perspectives shift. Desire loses its urgency when it is no longer needed as a shield against emptiness. Wants become preferences rather than necessities, enriching life without dominating it. Peace emerges from acceptance that some questions may remain open. Living fully despite uncertainty becomes its own form of meaning. As the need to chase meaning through endless desire begins to soften, another hidden belief often reveals itself: the quiet conviction that peace must be earned. Even when you understand that wanting cannot fill the emptiness, a deeper voice insists that rest, acceptance, and self-respect are rewards reserved for a future version of you who has finally proven worthy. Until then, tension remains, as if calm was something to unlock rather than something already available. There is a subtle harshness in conditional self-worth. It sounds like discipline, responsibility, ambition, but beneath it lies a refusal to offer kindness to yourself in the present. You may speak gently to others, forgive their mistakes, encourage their growth, yet treat yourself as a project that must justify its existence. This belief often begins early, shaped by environments where approval depended on performance. Love, attention, or safety may have felt uncertain unless expectations were met. The mind learned to equate value with achievement, internalizing the idea that worth must be demonstrated repeatedly. As an adult, the pattern continues even without external pressure. You set standards that shift as soon as they are reached. Completing one task creates the requirement for another. Rest feels undeserved because there is always more to do. Buddhist reflections describe this as attachment to identity through accomplishment. Instead of seeing yourself as inherently worthy of compassion, you see yourself as an unfinished product. Peace becomes conditional on perfection, which by definition is unreachable. This trap generates constant tension. Even moments of success carry anxiety because they must be maintained. Failure feels catastrophic because it threatens the fragile foundation of worth. Self-criticism becomes habitual. Instead of acknowledging effort, you focus on shortcomings. Progress is minimized, flaws are magnified. The inner voice mirrors the harshest judgments you once feared from others. Perfectionism often accompanies conditional self-worth. You believe mistakes reduce value, so you attempt to eliminate them entirely. This approach creates paralysis because the fear of imperfection blocks action. Relationships can suffer under this belief. You may struggle to accept love or support because it contradicts the idea that you must earn everything. Compliments feel uncomfortable, as if they were given prematurely. Comparison intensifies the trap. Observing others' achievements reinforces the belief that you are behind, that you must catch up before deserving peace. Instead of inspiring growth, comparison fuels inadequacy. Work becomes a measure of identity rather than an expression of skill. Overworking feels necessary to maintain worth, leading to exhaustion. Rest is interpreted as laziness rather than as recovery. Buddhist teachings emphasize that suffering arises from clinging to distorted views of the self. Conditional worth is one such view. It assumes that value can be increased or decreased by circumstances, ignoring the fundamental dignity of being human. Compassion offers an alternative perspective. Compassion recognizes that imperfection is universal. Every person struggles, learns, and changes. Worth is not a prize for success, but a condition shared by all. Mindfulness helps reveal the mechanics of self-judgment. By observing thoughts without identifying with them, you see how harsh narratives form and dissolve. This awareness weakens their authority. Acceptance does not eliminate growth. It creates a stable base from which growth can occur without fear. When you know that mistakes will not erase your worth, you are more willing to take risks and learn. Forgiveness is essential in breaking the cycle. You forgive yourself for past errors, for unmet expectations, for times when you believed you were not enough. Forgiveness releases the burden of proving something that was never truly in question. Gratitude shifts focus from deficiency to presence. Recognizing what already exists counters the belief that you are incomplete. Appreciation fosters contentment, independent of achievement. Rest becomes an act of trust. By allowing yourself to pause without guilt, You affirm that your value does not disappear when productivity stops. This trust gradually replaces anxiety. Boundaries protect against environments that reinforce conditional worth. Limiting exposure to constant evaluation or comparison supports healing. You choose contexts that encourage authenticity rather than performance. Creative activities can restore intrinsic motivation. When you create without seeking approval, you experience the joy of expression itself. This joy reminds you that worth is not tied to outcomes. Nature provides perspective as well. Natural systems do not demand justification for existence. A tree does not prove its worth by growing faster than others. It simply grows according to conditions. Relationships based on mutual respect rather than on achievement reinforce unconditional acceptance. Sharing vulnerability invites others to respond with empathy, dissolving isolation. Service shifts attention outward. Helping others without expecting recognition reveals that value lies in contribution, not in validation. Giving becomes fulfilling in itself. Buddhist reflections highlight the concept of loving kindness, extending goodwill toward yourself and others without conditions. Practicing this attitude softens self-judgment and nurtures peace. Inner dialogue transforms gradually. The critical voice loses dominance as compassionate perspectives gain strength. You learn to speak to yourself as you would to someone you care about deeply. Identity becomes less rigid. Instead of defining yourself by accomplishments, you see yourself as a dynamic process. Growth is ongoing, not a prerequisite for acceptance. Joy returns when pressure decreases. Activities once associated with performance become enjoyable again. Playfulness re-enters life, reminding you that existence includes pleasure as well as responsibility. Resilience increases because setbacks no longer threaten identity. Challenges are seen as experiences rather than as verdicts on worth. Recovery becomes easier. Time feels less urgent when you are not racing to prove yourself. You engage with tasks thoughtfully rather than frantically. Presence replaces panic. Buddhist teachings emphasize that liberation comes from recognizing the emptiness of fixed identities. When you stop clinging to the idea that worth must be earned, you experience freedom from constant evaluation. Peace becomes accessible now, not postponed until a future achievement. You allow yourself to feel calm without justification. This permission feels unfamiliar at first, but gradually becomes natural. You may notice resistance from old habits that equate tension with productivity. Letting go can feel risky because it challenges long-held beliefs. Patience is necessary as new patterns form. Over time, the need for external validation decreases. You trust your own perception of effort and intention. Approval becomes appreciated but not essential. Compassion for others deepens as well. Recognizing your own struggles with conditional worth helps you understand theirs. Empathy replaces judgment. Life becomes less about proving and more about participating. You engage with experiences for their intrinsic value rather than for what they demonstrate about you. You searched for satisfaction in achievement, in pleasure, in becoming someone else, only to discover that the hunger followed you everywhere. Every lesson brought you back to the same quiet truth. Nothing feels enough because the mind was trained to chase, not to rest. Desire promised completion but delivered motion, comparison, fear, and exhaustion. Yet, beneath all that noise, something steady has always been here. The part of you that does not need more to exist fully. When wanting loosens its grip, life stops feeling like a race you are losing and starts feeling like a moment you can finally enter. If something in this reflection touched you, write "I choose enough" in the comments. Not for me, but for yourself. A small decision to step off the endless chase and remember what it feels like to be here without needing to become anything else. If this helped you see your mind more clearly, subscribe and join this space for more reflections that quiet the noise and strengthen the part of you that was never broken.